Aldermen, ladies and gentlemen, can I ask you please to stand to the Mayor of the City of Clarence, Alderman Doug Chiplin.
Good evening everyone, and thank you very much, and very warm welcome to this first new council meeting since the elections, with 6 new faces around the table. It's going to be a very interesting time as we address some of the big issues ahead of us in Clarence. Before proceeding, I'd like to invite Reverend Chris Bowditch from the Anglican Church in Lindisfarne to open with a prayer.
Thanks, Doug. And before I do pray, on behalf of all the ministers of Clarence, we just wanted to pass on our congratulations to you all, and particularly those of you who've been newly elected. And you can be assured of our ongoing prayers, not just when we turn up to these meetings. So let me pray for us. Oh, Heavenly Father, we thank you for all your goodness and love. We thank you for this wonderful world that you have made and for the blessings that we enjoy every day. We pray that we may never take for granted the gift of life in such a beautiful place as the city of Clarence. Please help us to commit ourselves to the common good, that our community may continue to be a secure and blessed home for all its people. We pray for this council, for its members and officers. And we pray that you would grant to all who serve here wisdom, skill, imagination and energy. Protect them from corruption and the temptation of self-serving. Direct their work and influence their decisions for the safety and welfare of our community. Let their decisions enable peace and happiness, truth and justice to be established among us. Please continue to make us a diverse community that works together, that we would be a vibrant, prosperous and sustainable city, and that all decisions tonight would enable our vision. This we ask through Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen. Thank you.
Before proceeding, I'd like to acknowledge the Tasmanian Aboriginal community as the traditional custodians of the land that we're meeting on tonight, and pay respects to elders past and present. And also remind everyone that this meeting is being recorded audio-visually and will be available on the Clarence website later this week. Thank you. Declare the meeting open, and item 1A is a certificate of election. General Manager.
Mr Mayor, it's my pleasure to table the certificate of election following the recent local government elections.
Thank you. The recommendation is that the advice be noted. If I could have a move and second, please.
I'll move that, Mr Mayor.
Alderman Von Berto, seconded Alderman Pears. There being no questions, I'll put the motion. All those in favour? Carried unanimously. Item 1B is elected members' declaration. General Manager.
Again, Mr Mayor, following the election, I can certify that all aldermen have duly completed the declaration of office.
Okay. So the recommendation is that the General Manager's advice in respect to the completion of declarations by aldermen be acknowledged. If I could have a move and a seconder, please. Thank you, Alderman Kennedy. Do we have a seconder? Thank you very much, Alderman Edmonds. I'll put the motion. All those in favour? Carried unanimously. Item 1C is apologies, and obviously there are no apologies for tonight. Item 2 is confirmation of the minutes for the 22nd of October. As circulated, to be taken as read and confirmed. Thanks, Alderman Pears.
I'll second that, Mr Mayor.
Thanks, Alderman Von Berto. There have been no concerns with the minutes. I'll put the motion. All those in favour? Carried unanimously. Item 3 is the Mayor's communications, and as the first item in that, I notice that former Alderman Kay McFarlane is in the audience tonight, and I'd like to invite her to come forward to receive a certificate of appreciation. complete the citation in recognition of your outstanding contribution and commitment to the City of Clarence during your service as an Alderman between 2005 and 2018. I'm aware very much of your passion and interest in cycling, in tracks and trails and in natural resource management and grants and your work for the community. So on behalf of Clarence City Council, thank you for your service, very much appreciated.
Could I say one word? Nobody can do anything on their own. So within the council, it's been with the support of the other aldermen and also with the backing of the community who have been there from the beginning to the end. So thank you all.
Thanks, Clarence.
Still on the Mayor's communications, I'd like to advise that last week on the 8th of November we met with the Federal Minister Tudge and also State Minister Gutwin and the four metropolitan mayors and had a review of the foundations for the city deal that's been mooted for the City of Hobart. We agreed that we'd continue to work towards the finalisation of the Hobart City deal by the end of this year, and we'd continue to focus on the 5 key areas of the Greater Hobart Act, which I believe, General Manager, is available very shortly.
It's to be circulated very shortly, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. As a draft for our input to that. The Greater Hobart Transport Vision, affordable housing, Antarctic and Science Precinct at Macquarie Point, and supporting the STEM and innovation with the move of the UTAS to the City of Hobart Central. So if I could just have that recorded in the minutes, please, General Manager. Thank you. Item 4, that Council notes the agenda briefing was held on Friday the 9th of November. If I could have a mover and a seconder for that. Thanks, Alderman Blomley. Second, Alderman Newington. All those in favour? Carried unanimously. Item 5, declarations of interests of Alderman or close associate. So if there are any declarations of interest, could you please let me know? There being none. Tabling of petitions. There are none on the agenda. Are there any petitions from the Alderman? Thank you. Item 7 is public question time. There are no public questions on notice or answers, therefore. However, we do have an answer to a previous question taken on notice. General Manager.
Mr. Mayor, I don't propose to read the answer. It's as printed in the agenda.
Thank you. Are there any questions from members of the public without notice? We'll start in the front and then 2 over that way.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. My name's Michael Figg. I live at Lauderdale. And first of all, I'd like to have a statement to congratulate all of the aldermen for having the guts to stand, and also the honour to represent the community. Well done. My questions are one posed by members of Lauderdale. One was a clarification on the answer you gave, Mr. GM. The question was relating to the fire truck from Mr. Mackey. And if you remember at the meeting at Lauderdale, he stated the local fire brigade uses the boat ramp to access the beach, and they were concerned that the weight of a fully laden fire truck wouldn't go over the new boat ramp. So that's a clarification of what we were talking about there. So there's still some concern about that. Also, the Mackeys asked me to ask a question on the drains in Lauderdale. Along Manatta and Ringwood Road, they're still full of water and they're not draining. Could we have an answer to how that's going to be fixed? I know there's a small fall, but even so, we've got to get the water away.
Through Mr Mayor, I'll have to take advice on those and we'll provide an answer at the on the next agenda.
Thank you very much.
And could I congratulate you also for standing, Mr Figg?
Thank you.
A couple of questions. Pete? Yes. This session's not to be confused with the opportunity to petition. There'll be next item on the agenda. If you've already booked an opportunity to make a statement to council, that'll be the next item. But if you have a question now, that's fine. If you could just identify yourself and the place of residence, please.
Yeah, my name's Peter William McDermott. I'm nearly 73 years of age and I live at 1 Hookie Place in Rokeby. And my question is to you, Doug, and your General Manager, and Ross Graham. I am here again with my complaint about the street light opposite my place, which I have contacted you and your General Manager and Ross Graham and by many influential people several times. The street light throws out massive brightness, causing me medical problems. It was put back up again because of Wagner family complaining at 66 Hookie Street. And tonight, what are you going to do about it? 3 months ago, you promised me that you would do something in relation. I will keep coming back if not fixed. And I'd just like to add to that, have to close 2 bedroom doors, and you have ignored a doctor's certificate, and I would like peace of mind of it.
Thank you, Mr McDermott.
Mr Mayor, when are we going to get resolution of this? This has been going on for 2 years.
Alderman James, please. Alderman James, can we let the General Manager provide a response, please?
Might ask Mr Graham if you
Mr
can.
Graham?
Through you, Mr Mayor. I'm not sure the exact time, but about 4 weeks ago we put up some shielding. We changed the visor, which is what Tas Networks suggested would be a good solution. Mr McDermott has said that it's made no difference and provided a further letter to Council asking the light to be moved away. We've provided a copy of that letter to Tas Networks asking can they do this or are there any other options. Tas Networks said the light on the existing light can't be moved away from that light, or it can't be shifted in direction from that actual light pole because there's too much infrastructure on that. They have suggested another visor to be placed on the existing light, which would put out less spill from the light. So in discussions with, or emailing with Tas Networks today, they've said a works order has been issued today to replace the LISA with a further enhanced LISA, which will have less spill. So I'll advise Mr McDermott and Council when I've heard that visor has been installed.
Thank you. Can I just add to that, Mr Chickman? The people at 66 Hookie Street that complained originally about the light, I've had that much harassment from them, and it's been unbelievable.
Thank you, Mr McDermott. I understand it's a very difficult situation for you. Yes.
And 73, I drive a coach and it doesn't, I never sleep.
Thank you. Other questions from members of the public?
Sachi Yasuda, Milana Road, Lindisfarne. Congratulations to all the aldermen. It's great to see some new faces here. Probably just a comment first off, that the sound in here is still probably not fantastic. It is much improved from what it was previously. I was wondering if the sound engineer might come back for an actual council meeting and take some measurements or do something.
I'm sure we can arrange that.
We'll follow up on it.
Yeah, fantastic.
Any other questions from members of the public without notice? Item 8 is deputations by members of the public. General Manager.
Through Mr Mayor, we have 3 deputations this evening. The first is Mr Sam Sterling from Alford Street in Howrah, who wishes to address Council in respect of item 11.3.4, 7A Victoria Esplanade. You can come forward, please.
While you're coming forward, I do need to remind speakers that there's only an opportunity for 3 minutes and there'll be a tone of 2.5 minutes to give you the opportunity to wind up.
Thank you. Hello, Alderman, new and existing. So I'm here to make a bit of a speech just about the pavilion building that's got a development application in at the moment. Firstly, I'd just like to say that me and my family, we're locals, have been locals for a long time, and I really wanted to take the I found the Bellerive Regatta Pavilion, and I thought it would be a great opportunity to turn it into a restaurant. It's a very run-down building, and it needs quite a considerable bit of work done to it to bring it up to be able to put a restaurant in it. My main points tonight are to be talking about the cash in lieu for parking, which has been recommended at $85,000. I'm looking for an exemption or a reduction in this amount. It's mainly, it's quite a considerable amount of money to be put onto a business in its first couple of years, and the amount of money that we're going to have to renovate it'll put an extra pressure on the first couple of years. It's a community building, was built as a community building, and it's been unutilised for a long time, and hopefully with your support on what I'm seeking, we can turn it back into a building which will be utilised by many people in the community. Just in regards to the parking, I'd like to say that I feel as if there's already a fair amount of parking in the area. There's roughly about 30 to 40 parks already in the area for people that use the bike paths and things already, and I feel as if a lot of our customers will be coming from the local Bluff, local Bellerive area, so I believe a good 50% of our customers will be walking to the building and not needing to park in the area. I also understand that the parking in lieu scheme is an important thing. We need to bring the money raised from the parking in lieu and put that back into parking and just infrastructure in the area. I guess also from my point of view, I feel that the substantial amount that we'll be investing into a very old building will be an investment back into the community itself. That's all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Next speaker, Mr Mayor, is Sam Morse, who wishes to address Council in relation to item 11.3.5, 99 Pike Clay Esplanade. Good morning. Come forward, please.
Firstly, I just want to say my experiences with the Clarence Council up until now have been exceptional. We build all across southern Tasmania, and they actually have been the best council to deal with on DA and BA applications. However, this one at 99 Piper's Esplanade for Nick McGrath, this DA's been going on since 2017. He's seeking a renovation, an upstairs renovation with two small decks, one out the front, one out the rear. Back in 2016, I built a deck out there for Mr McGrath that was approved by Clarence Council. And it's interesting because on the new application, this deck actually is more than a metre back from the one that was approved in 2016. The house itself is well over 50 years old, needs underpinning, needs works. While this application's been going on, he's spent in excess of $10,000 on coastal erosion reports and so forth. Only to get to the end of this 4 weeks ago to be told that council were turning down the application, and basically he bought a lemon that he wasn't allowed to renovate due to the coastal erosion. The report that we had done by GES in fact actually says that the dunes have grown in that time since council's report done in 2009. The property next door is a new dwelling that was built 3 to 4 years ago. They seem to get their application through. Basically, what I'm here and representing Nick is to try and see if this can be looked at in more depth, as I don't believe it should have been turned down when we've gone so far through the application process to get to here. Maybe it should have been at the start of the application, because we're now in a situation that this person spent X amount of money to get a no, which probably could have been discussed at the start of the application. The footprint actually doesn't change from the existing footprint, so we're not encroaching further into the dunes. I don't believe it causes overshadowing where the properties next door don't get 3 hours of natural sunlight, which I think is the requirement for when you're building a new dwelling. There was a wastewater issue. Well, my client's more than happy to install a new envirocycle or whatever spec when we get to that stage, if we get to that stage. So there's not an issue in meeting all those criteria. I guess the biggest point is with this coastal erosion. If you buy a property on the beach at Cremorne, are you sort of buying it on the proviso that you can't do anything with the building at all? I mean, it's 50 years old. It won't be here in 20 years, let alone 60 years when you're saying the dunes will be encroaching on the property. So work needs to be done. And me as a licensed builder, I need permits in place to be able to do the work. So basically, we've got all the documentations here for everybody to look at tonight. And as I said, the footprint hasn't changed, so I don't understand Council's view on why this application's been turned down. We've met every criteria that's come to us over the last 12 plus months. Is how long this DA's been going on. I just think it's unreasonable that a resident in the Clarence City Council is unable to improve their property. We're obviously willing to adapt our DA.
Thanks very much, Mr. Horse. We are out of time.
No
Thanks.
Next speaker, Mr Mayor, is Denise Hoggan of Galarka Street, Rosny Point, who wishes to address Council in relation to the zoning of Rosny Hill.
That was quick.
Mr Mayor, Madam Deputy Mayor, councillors, firstly congratulations on your election, and secondly a huge thank you for committing yourself for 4 years to the goodwill of the Clarence community. Now, I'm speaking as an individual resident of Clarence, and I'm speaking to you tonight because, as Mayor Chipman said at the meeting of the 1st of October, you will be the council that deals with the fate of Rosny Hill. In other words, colloquially speaking, you get the pointy end. You get the slippery slope of the iceberg. And there's much more iceberg underneath the bit that you have to deal with. Now, perhaps like me, you've encountered some curiosity about the zoning of Rosny Hill when you have a look at the iPlan maps. That's what set me off on an investigative journey some 18 months ago. And it took me back a ways, diving down to find the bottom of the iceberg, right back to 2009, which was as far as I managed to go, or was prepared to go, and that's when council became the managing authority. 2010, the hill was mentioned as a source of prosperity. 2011, the non-statutory management strategy for Rosny Hill was produced by council, and I was actually handed a paper copy of that because at the time I was the land care coordinator, so I had to pay particular attention to it. Now, the non-statutory nature of it means that it is subservient to the National Parks and Reserves Management Act. If the land had been zoned environmental management, council would have had to have had a statutory management plan in place, and that would then have put more control over the developers. Now, in 2013, please, Mr Mayor, correct me if I'm wrong, 2013, lease, 2014, preferred developer agreement. Since then, we, the residents, have been given nothing but a developer's dream. Now, what I want as a retired person and a senior citizen is intergenerational equity. I want there to be a chance for the same physical and mental health and well-being for future generations that I've had in this beautiful city.
Thank you.
I thank you.
Thank you very much.
No further speakers, Mr Mayor.
Item 9 is motions on notice, and there are none. Item 10, reports from outside bodies. 10.1 deals with reports from single and joint authorities, the first of which is the Southern Tasmanian Council's Authority, and I note that the September quarterly report is still pending. For the Copping Refuse Disposal Site Joint Authority, I think Alderman Walker is proxy under the old arrangements. If you have anything to report.
I do.
Walker.
I'm tabling the Copping Refuse Joint Authority AGM. I won't read it out cover to cover, but there are some sensational components in this year. The C-cell construction was completed, and a consolidated net surplus before tax was pretty reasonable as well. So I'll pass that on.
Thanks, Alderman Walker. For the Tas Water Corporation, I'd like to table the quarterly report to the owners' representatives as of the 30 September 2018. Thank you. Also note that the AGM for Tas Water is later this month on the 27th, and I will be attending that as your rep, along with General Manager. I think it's the 27th? 29th, apology. 10.2 deals with reports from other council and special committees and other representative bodies. I'm aware that we need to go through a process of allocating those at the next council meeting, and we'll be discussing those at workshops. But if there are any residual reports that Alderman would like to make from previous 4 years.
Mr Mayor, I don't have a written report, but I actually have a verbal report. As a member of the Events Committee in the last iteration of Council, I'd actually like to express my thanks to the staff and the community members who've attended the first 2 dance hall days. I don't know if anyone actually was present at the Richmond one. I'm sure that the Deputy Mayor was, yes. And I was present at the Sanford one. I believe that at the Richmond one there were 35 people present, and at the Sanford one there was at least 80. So things are going well, getting more and more interested in what's happening. I think it's really important to note that the dance hall days are actually about bringing life and use back to our halls. And it was absolutely wonderful to see at the Sanford Dance Hall Day that we had a little person who was about 18 months old, a little boy, right through to people who are much older, and they all enjoyed themselves. So I suggest there's a number of dance hall days still to go. I suggest that you try and get along to one. Thank you.
Thanks, Alderman von Berto. I must say these dance hall days have got a lot to answer for. My parents met at the Cambridge one many, many years ago.
There we go. Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Are there any other reports? Moving on to item 11, reports of officers. 11.1, that the information contained in the weekly briefing reports of the 22nd, 29th of October and the 5th of November be noted. If we could have a mover and a seconder first, and then I'm quite happy to take any questions there might be in regard to those reports. Alderman Jones? Moving it?
Yes.
Are you moving the motion?
I'll wait for you to seek a mover and seconder.
Thank you. Can I have Alderman Pearce has moved it. Do we have a second? Alderman Newington? Thank you.
Yes, look, I refer to the weekly briefing report of the 22nd of October 2018 and to the section referring to development applications approved under delegated authority. My question through you to Mr Lovell in his capacity as the Manager of City Planning. Mr Lovell, on D 2018/364, which is on the second last page, it refers to a visitor accommodation standing in the name of J. Upton at 139 Cremorne Avenue, Cremorne. Mr Lovell, is that decision that was made by the officers, did it include the advice section that we have been including in visitor accommodation applications, that the determination of visitor accommodation requires some permanent person residing actually in the vicinity of that development. And was that contained within the approval notice that went out to the applicant?
Sorry, Mr. Mayor, I don't recall the details, however I can forward you a copy of the permit so you can review that. As it is not always the case that one must live in the house, under the state's controls for Airbnb type accommodation, there are various alternative arrangements you can have. Some of them which require the manager to be on site, others don't. And I simply can't recall which category this particular application falls.
In relation to the advice section that we have included in the applications when it had to come to council, would that have been included in the advice to the applicant as distinct from a manager being in a dwelling on the site in order?
So, Mr. Mayor, I can't recall the details of it. It's possible the application may have been made with the express purpose of not having a manager on site.
Yes.
So that advice was then to be redundant. So I can just identify the correct permit before that on.
Thank you. Are there any other questions from the weekly briefing report? Alderman Pearce.
Mayor, November the 5th, I'm reading the tree maintenance at Bridge Street, Richmond. And may I say, look, I do congratulate the officers on this because I went and had a look at these trees. They're in Bridge Street, they're very close to the bridge, and our officers, the trees need some work, and it was raised to me, it was told to me by a ratepayer, and our officers were good enough to have a quick look, and the trees do need some work, and they're very big trees, so I'm really thankful that the staff got onto this straight away, Mayor.
Comments on the weekly briefing reports? In that case, I'll put the motion, which is to note the information in those three reports. All those in favour? Against? Carried. At 11.2, there are no determination of petitions to be considered. So I'd like to advise that Council now intends to sit as a planning authority under the Land Use Planning and Approvals Act. And move to item 11.3.1, which is a development application at 14 Bayside Drive, Lauderdale, for 2 multiple dwellings. Alderman Newington, thank you. Do we have a seconder? Thanks, Alderman Blomley. Alderman Newington, would you like to speak to the motion?
Well, I think one of the real issues facing our community at the moment is housing and an opportunity for people to take advantage of the areas that people want to live in. And I think somewhere like Lauderdale, where this proposal, is talking about two blocks on one piece of land. I think we need to really see that happen in a lot of other locations. I know people were so used to having one house on one block, but I think to stop the urban sprawl and to make it easier for us to control our costs in relation to infrastructure supplied to the community. I think making it easy to do that sort of thing, not only in this sort of situation, but as a matter of how we go about things, I think it's a great thing. I know there's some people out there that get a bit concerned by losing privacy and losing, having density and all those sort of things, but I think it's the way that we have to go to create a community in a city that can continue to grow and allow people to live in the areas they want to live in. So, fully supportive.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Mr. Mayor, just to add to Alderman Newington's comments, I think this is a very savvy design. I think it's an enhancement of the area, and I'm very pleased to be supporting the recommendation this evening.
Thank you. Other speakers? Well, actually, Alderman Mulder, I actually saw your hand go up first. Well, I wasn't used to that approach, I must admit.
I was trying to be courteous to the elder statesman.
If we could keep to planning matters, please.
Well, he plans to be general, doesn't he? The proposal was advertised in accordance with statutory requirements and 3 representations were received. I've had a look at the site. I've seen the fact that the issue really with this one is that it exceeds the building envelope. And the building envelopes were put there for a very good reason. And it's a little unfortunate that the way we get these things is that we don't really get an opportunity to find out whether or not the developer, before he puts his application in, knowing that he's going to exceed the, he's going to have to require to be advertised and for it to come before a planning authority meeting, whether there's been any contact with the neighbours, any negotiation about how some of these issues could be dealt with in a reasonable way. And it sort of disappoints me sometimes that we get these dropped on us, and it's for us to divide Solomon's baby between the applicant and the people who have represented. And I'd really like to know sometimes, and I'd like to encourage developers, if they know they're going to exceed the envelope, if they know that it's going to have to become before a planning authority, at least they could do is talk to their neighbours and maybe negotiate some sensible solution so that they could get the building they want and the neighbours wouldn't be in here representing. So that's the only observation I make. Having actually looked at the place myself yesterday, I think it's a great development, and I really don't see how you could actually modify it, given the fact that it's on a top of a hill that has magnificent views of French Road, and if you didn't have these sorts of decks and things extruding in over the thing, you wouldn't be able to take advantage of the views. And at the same time, there's a great opportunity, of course, to take some mitigating factors in place. But some of those things, had they been discussed with neighbours, may have solved everyone a lot of grief.
Yeah, look, thank you, Mr Mayor. An interesting scenario in as much as that on the report that's before us, there is a number of areas within the planning scheme that in fact it does not comply, and at the meeting on Friday I did raise a couple of matters, and I'll refer to them again. On page 26, under the general residential zone, sunlight and overshadowing for all dwellings, it does not comply. Unit 2 is orientated at 43 degrees west and north. And the performance criteria on page 27 says, and I quote, each of the proposed dwelling units would be orientated to largely face north. So in other words, there is this wriggle room that can come into performance criteria to make it sort of the line of best fit, if you want to use that sort of term. The other point that I raised, and I only received some explanation, if I can say that, this evening, it was on page 27. On page 27, referring to privacy for all dwellings, it does not comply. The deck of Unit 1 setback 0 metres from the western side boundary, and deck Unit 2 setback 1.52 from the eastern side. Then it says that Unit 1 does not comply. The deck on Unit 1 setback is 1.5 metres from the southern boundary. So now we go to performance criteria, because the performance criteria is the way out. If we meet the performance criteria, then we've got a tick in the box and we can say that this particular proposal is okay. What is interesting on page 28, it goes into chapter and verse in the performance criteria about Unit 1. But Unit 2 was in fact referred to as being, does not comply because of its setback, and there's no mention at all within the performance criteria in relation to that. So in the absence of, in fact, performance criteria to Unit 2, can we say then that it does not comply because it has not been addressed by the performance criteria? So in other words, there is a problem there because it hasn't been addressed under that particular heading. On page 30, and before I go to page 30, can I say that the bee's knees of all of this sort of performance criteria assessment tends to rely upon, in most instances, on a 1.5 privacy screen on that part of the balcony to make it sort of not as imposing in relation to the nearby property. One of the representatives, in making a comment, said that the proposed 1.5 metre privacy screen on the western elevation would be inadequate for protection of neighbourly views. So in actual fact, by using the performance criteria of putting up a screen, by the very nature seems to address any particular problem in relation to privacy, but it does not address that matter in relation to what is being proposed in this instance. So there are problems, in my view, with the performance criteria. And I would be bold enough to say, Mr Mayor, that any application that comes forward where a discretion is required, then it's really a permitted use, because you can go through the performance criteria, you can wriggle around and basically tick off those comments by saying that part of the overhanging or the shade would affect one part of the balcony. So in other words, the people would be required to sit at the other end of the veranda in order to be able to enjoy an afternoon sunshine. So this is the problem we have with this one, because it's not, in my view, going to benefit the community, and because of the nature of the wriggle room within and the subjectivity that goes into performance criteria, I cannot support this, because I believe the impact on this is going to be detrimental to the adjoining property.
Other speakers? Alderman Walker.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. When blocks of land are purchased within Clarence, you could say it's a market transaction, a willing buyer, willing seller. Part of the pricing mechanism is also a big component around that is the capacity of what you can do with the site. The minimum plot size under this scheme is 325 metres. That's the minimum. These lots are 325, and I could be wrong, but 325 and 12 centimetres on average. Because it's so small, the capacity is constrained with that. That's reflected in the price. I've reflected on this a bit, and it is requiring, as it's currently drafted, more concessions than a Brexit negotiation. And I'm not in a position to support it as it's listed by the officers.
Thanks, Alderman Walker. Other speakers? Right, reply, Alderman Newington.
No,
Oh, I'm sorry, Alderman Warren, I missed you there.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. As a new alderman and new to the planning scheme, I'm still finding my way around how you have a building envelope, but you can go outside of that as long as you have certain wriggle room, as Alderman James puts it. It seems to me that inside looking out is far better than outside looking in from the neighbour's perspective, and the planning scheme doesn't take that into account. So we can't actually take that into account in our assessment, unfortunately. I do support Alderman Mulder's comments that it would be better if the developers could work with the neighbours and work within the building envelope, but we have to deal with what we've been presented with, and I think the representations from the neighbours are worth taking into account that this does not necessarily address their need for privacy. And it would be nice to see some mediation happen here and perhaps meet some middle ground.
Before I call on Alderman Newington for a right reply. Alderman Newington.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I probably don't have a lot more to add from what I said at the beginning, but there's got to be rules and regulations in life, and the opportunity for us to sort of define what people can and can't do. But I'd like to think in a situation like this, where we do need to have the economic activity in our community to allow people to build the house. And we're talking about having housing crisis in
We do need to focus on the planning criteria, Alderman Newington.
I'm only learning, Mr Mayor.
Yeah, and I understand that, and it's a general reminder.
I think I'll stick with what I said at the beginning, and I suppose I will leave it at that.
Thanks very much. So the motion is the Alderman's recommendation, the General Manager's... The officer's recommendation. All those in favour? Against? The motion is carried. Item 11.3.2 is a development application at 90 Shellamouth Drive, Acton Park for a dwelling. Moved Alderman Pearce, thank you. Seconded Alderman Walker. Alderman Pearce.
Thank you, Mayor. This application is for a dwelling at 90 Shellamouth Drive, Acton, and we had one representation, impact on rural environment, proposed building setback. Now, if we look at this site here, it's 1.08 hectares, and look, it's an irregular shape. Otherwise, I'd probably be kicking up a bit of a fuss too, but the block is an irregular shape. And look, the dwelling itself is a height of 4.7, so it's a very low impact, I believe. So I believe this deserves our support.
Thanks, Alderman Pearce. Alderman Walker. Any other speakers? I guess there's no need for a right of reply, Alderman Pearce. The motion is the officer's recommendation. All those in favour? Carried unanimously. Item 11.3.3 is a development application at 74 Bastic Street, Rosny, for a dwelling. Do we have a mover, please? Alderman Newington, thank you. Seconder? Thanks, Alderman Walker. Alderman Newington, would you like to speak to the motion?
Well, I'll take a bit of practice. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yeah, I mean, obviously I've had a good look at. I mean, it fits in with what I said in the last situation, where the ability to take full advantage of the land that's out there. And I think this is a great development that fills in obviously a vacant piece of land in an area that's highly sought after, and I think it would be fantastic. Another ratepayer in the community. I think it's a good thing, and I'd certainly support the approval of this project.
Thank you, Alderman Walker.
Look, I note what Alderman Newington has said, and would again note that the site is a 599 metre squared vacant lot. There is capacity and scope to put an application that fits in a way that this one does.
Thank you,
Yes, thanks, Mr. Mayor. I may need to seek guidance from Mr. Lovell, but I'll start with my opening comments on page 71. And it says under the private open space, that's under 10.4.3A2, subpara C. Private open space is directly accessible from and adjacent to a habitable room other than a bedroom, and it does not comply. The private open space would be located to the east rear of the dwelling and would not be directly accessible from the lower floor rumpus room, in that it's separated by a narrow deck. So we go over to the performance criteria on page 72, and of course that is addressing the acceptable solutions in relation to the private open space, and it says under P2, subnumeral 1, the ground floor private open space would be located to the east of the dwelling and would be directly accessible from the ground level rumpus by the decked area. The ground level open space is considered to be of an appropriate locations and in proportions to facilitate a range of outdoor activities such as relaxation and children's play and gardening. So how does it gel with that it's the ground level private open space is located to the east of the dwelling, whereas in the it does not comply under acceptable solutions when it says the private open space will be located to the east rear of the dwelling and would not be directly accessible from the lower floor of the rumpus. Where are you, Ross? Okay. Can you explain why on the one hand the acceptable solution says that it's not accessible, and then once you get to the performance criteria, once you get to the performance criteria, you have that obviously it is accessible. Can you just explain, please?
Mr. Mayor, under the acceptable solution, you need to access the open space directly from a habitable room. In this case, you leave the habitable room, go to a deck, and then out to the open space. So it's merely the transition, the deck being the transition, satisfies the performance criteria, and that is different from accessing directly from the room.
So in other words, if you have a deck or have some means to move from a habitable room to the open space, then you can have any means of doing that, in other words, can you? You can have that conduit.
Perhaps I can answer a different way. Because of the presence of the deck, it doesn't meet the acceptable solution because it's not directly accessible from the room. You've got to go via the deck. But when you get to assessing it under the performance criteria, the fact that the deck there is irrelevant. It's accessible from the deck. There is an area of open space, and it's an adequate area of open space there, so therefore it meets the performance criteria.
The deck is accessible to the deck. What's the
All right. Any other speakers on this motion? Alderman Mulder.
You know, I'm aware of the politics of these things, but I'd just like to sort of point out that these things come to us because they are discretionary, and I believe they come to us because we need a subjective judgment that we make on behalf of the whole community. If we follow the line of reasoning that I've already heard tonight, and I've heard many, many times before, the fact is that if it doesn't fit inside the discretion, then I can't approve it. And that's the case, it would be a very, very simple planning authority, because every development application would be allowed as of right, and everyone that now requires us to make a subjective judgment would end up being defeated because it wouldn't even get here because it doesn't meet it. So the purpose is that you can't get a planning scheme that will suit every place, every site, and basically you have a basic right to build what you like on your land, subject to its impact on other people. And that's what this discretion is about. And that is where you have to sometimes divide Solomon's baby. I do not wear the argument that if it's a discretionary and if it doesn't meet comply with one of the criteria, that somehow or other we are duty bound to defeat it. That is not what the planning scheme is about. It's about us representing our community and deciding whether or not these variations to the scheme, I think if it was not so, they wouldn't even get here.
Thanks, Alderman. Other speakers? Right, a reply, Alderman Newington.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Alderman Mulder, you sort of took the words out of my mouth there. Look, I mean, if one of the things I think we have a rule, we still need rules and regulations in life, but we also need the ability to use a bit of common sense. And whether you're walking across a deck to an open space or walking directly on the open space, to me, is an example of the over-regulation of our lives, and the fact that we're all wasting time, effort and money talking about something as simple as that and not going in a common sense situation. It's their life, they want to build on it, and to a certain extent, as long as they're not impacting on anyone else, they've chosen to build it that way. And I think, to say that something like that, just because it doesn't fit, to reiterate Alderman Mulder's comments, I think we've got the discretion to make that decision. I think in this situation, it's more than appropriate to support it.
Thank you. So the recommendation is for approval, subject to conditions and advice. All those in favour? Against? Carried. Item 11.3.4 is a development application at 7A Victoria Esplanade for a change of use to restaurant, additions and alterations. Alderman Newington.
Yeah, I'd like to propose an amendment to the office recommendation on this.
I understand that's the one that's been circulated. Do we have a seconder, please? Alderman Kennedy, thank you. Alderman Newington.
Sorry, Mr Mayor, can I just ask what's actually being moved?
We haven't got one, mate.
Okay.
No,
No, it's one that came round with Alderman Newington. Okay. Well,
Sorry, Mr Mayor, I'd say the minutes we don't still don't work.
I have some here if you would like them.
If you've got a spare one there, please, Alderman Newington. So, as I understand it, if we're on the same page, you're moving that adopts the council officer's recommendation subject conditions 3 and 8 being amended. That's the one that everyone's got? Okay. Sorry?
Yeah, that's right.
Would you like to speak to the motion?
Oh, sure. Look, I mean, this proposal, I suppose, is an example of the exact reason why I put my hand up to stand for council. You know, I mean, being a long-term, lifelong Clarence resident, I've obviously had a lot of experience looking and seeing that location and using it for my 30th birthday and going to plenty of events there and plenty of other situations. And I mean, for me, it's been a really underutilised resource. And I don't think anyone's going to disagree with that. You know, something that really needs to be looked at in terms of what's the best use of this facility. In my lifetime, I've never known anyone that's come along and put a proposal forward to do something with it. And I mean, one of the things that really stood out to me when I was sitting there trying to formulate my approach to how to approach this situation, and I was sitting there looking at my council booklet, and it's got something on here that says that Clarence to be the best city in which to live, enjoy recreation, and to develop or open a business. And when I think about that vision, I think this is really a moment in time where, if we're going to be serious about our approach to the vision that we say that we stand by, it's a classic example of whether we're going to actually do that. I mean, if you look at the facts in this situation, I mean, what makes a great city to live in? Having iconic locations to go and have a meal and look at the view of the city.
Alderman Ewing, I hate to interrupt again, but we really do have to focus on the planning issues associated with this particular application.
Okay, all right. I suppose a couple of points I would give you a little bit of latitude on this one. I mean, look, the situation is, we either an opportunity to make it easy for someone to develop a business and get something off the ground, or we make it difficult. I just believe that the impost of charging $85,000 for car parking is an excessive amount for someone who basically has got to come up with, put $300,000 and put his life savings into something to get a business off the ground that's going to benefit the whole community. And then to also turn around and after finding out that, the hours that were originally written down really restricted his ability to actually get anywhere, because he wasn't able to, if the hours that were in the original document were not open until 10 o'clock on a Sunday, there's no breakfast meals on a Sunday, and then closing at 6 o'clock at night. You spend all the money to get set up on the day and then you've got to close down at 6 o'clock at night. It just doesn't make sense. So if we're going to support business, telling someone they've got to pay $85,000 up front for an area which I think has got adequate parking, and then to restrict his opening hours, it just doesn't make sense to me. The thing is, it will greatly enhance the recreational amenity of the community. One of the big things that I think lets down Salamanca is that we all go there to eat and drink, and the people on Battery Point who are too, I don't know what your word to use there, I don't know what's allowed in the council chambers, but pig-headed to even look at the walkway around the outside of the Battery Point. We've got an opportunity to create a hub and a space that goes around the community. The playground, the pavilion, the paths, the ability to actually integrate eating and drinking with somewhere to go and have a walk afterwards, I think is an opportunity that's too good for us to let slip. It comes down to the other thing too, is that everyone I've spoken to that's known about this proposal, I have not heard one person say to me, no, how could you let that happen? Now, obviously there's concerns there in relation to some of the parking issues, but I counted at least 70 car parks either side of that business, plus parking on the side of the road, plus parking in King Street, and those sort of things. Now, I know we've got to consider precedent where we've had these situations where we charge parking in lieu, but just because we've done that doesn't mean that's what we have to stick with. I think that the bigger issue in Belrive is in relation to the ferry service, if that comes to fruition, and we've got to deal with something larger there. But any car parking in lieu probably isn't going to be spent on stuff that is going to be directly outside this business, or something that is even needed in this first instance at the moment. I'll give you an example. I went to North Hobart yesterday for lunch in the afternoon, and you imagine a restaurant in North Hobart, if they had 70 car parks outside with one restaurant, I think they'd be pretty happy. And to say that we need to, get extra car parking in that area, which I think is more than adequate for what would be needed, would be, I think it is adequate there. So all in all, I think it's a fantastic development. I think it would, create a potentially iconic, location for people on the Eastern Shore to go and use and dine in. I think it would send a fantastic message to the community out there that we are open for business and that we're there to support people and not put up roadblocks in the way. Supporting a local person, a local family to actually have a crack and go over there and do stuff, I think that's something that's really important as well. And like I said, this is, like I said, why I've sort of put my hand up and go for council. We really need to make it easy for people to do stuff, and I think that the opportunity to create something that will be great for all of us and create jobs is a fantastic thing that I'm fully in support of.
Thank you. Alderman Kennedy?
I'll be brief. I think we're looking at something that is a little more unique. I believe the developer is aware of car parking spaces and why we do actually as a council charge at times for them. This development is, we all know, the pavilion. It is on the fringe of the village. In this case, I believe that it is something to be encouraged, and I think it would be, for $85,000 in parking fees would be very, very difficult for a small business to actually get started. So I support this in a reduction of the amount of car parking spaces and the jobs attached to that.
Other speakers? Alderman Warren.
I'd just like to clarify which motion we're looking at, because I believe we have two in front of us, one from Alderman Walker and one from Mr Ewington, or is it Alderman Walker?
It's the one from Alderman Ewington.
So one recommends a decrease to 20,000, the other
Correct.
recommends a decrease to 50.
The other one, the 50,000 one is not on the table at the moment.
Okay,
It's
so we're
the
looking at the
20,000 one.
20,000 one.
Yeah.
Okay, so look, congratulations to Mr Sterling for putting forward this proposal. I believe it is a really good proposal and has the potential to be very successful. I had a look at the area this afternoon. Yes, there is some parking. Given that this is operating during the day, as is consistent with the residential zoning, there would be high traffic use of those parking spaces that already exist. Yes, there are some parking, or there is some parking available in King Street. I looked at the houses directly opposite. If I was going to a restaurant and there was no parking available in the designated areas, I would park immediately opposite. So there's the chance to fill up that residential zone so that people would not be able to have visitors come on a Saturday afternoon because they wouldn't be able to get parking outside their own houses. So look, I think it's reasonable to consider some decrease in the value, but I would like to see some additional parking made because this development, which I sincerely hope will be really successful and generate lots of customers, will then require a little bit of designated parking as well.
James?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. It's an interesting scenario that three of our new councillors have actually put forward a reduction in support of the recommendations before the chair.
Right.
I just wanted to make sure I covered my tail in that regard. So, speaking to the motion,
thank you.
In other words, the question of parking has been a topical issue within the city for many years, and there has been good reasons why we have in fact imposed the 10,000 within the village zone. It's not parking fees, as Alderman Kennedy, it's a parking cash in lieu for parking. And it's a good reason for that, because many of the businesses in the area have actually paid that cash in lieu. So by determining now to reduce that, it's going to sort of open up the debate from the business owners within the village precinct, who in fact have had to pay cash in lieu for parking when they want to do an extension or change their use of their business. So in other words, they will be disenfranchised to a degree because we are now deciding not to impose the 5,000, which is what the officers have recommended, which is really in keeping with the Kangaroo Bay zone, and that's been identified within the officers' report of saying that it's not 10,000 because that's within the Belrive Village zone, but 5,000, which in my opinion, is quite adequate, because when you're going to discuss with the business people within the Bellerive area, they're going to say, how come council decided to waiver X number of car parking spaces when we in fact had to pay for that? And that tends to cause, I believe, some consternation between the business people within that area, because we all know that there is inadequate parking, and there's going to be enormous pressure put on once our public pier is built, and also too when in fact the actual development in Kangaroo Bay proceeds. So we have to look ahead, and by just looking at this, and I appreciate that it's a great little business and that pavilion needs to be utilised. But by going outside our framework of looking to the long term and providing this sort of bankrolling a parking, multi-tier car parking space pavilion, which we have identified as we may require in the short term, we are then really denying ourselves of some funding in order to build that. And so in conclusion, Mr Mayor, I think that we need to support, and I'm a small business operator, we need to support small business, but by laxing in our rules, or as Alderman Newington said, we need rules, we need procedures, because that's how it works. But at the same time, by relaxing these rules and therefore denying other business owners who've had to foot the bill, I think it's not the way to go. I would support the officer's recommendation, and if this motion is lost, Mr Mayor, I'll move the officer's recommendation. And that applies in relation to the hours as well. I still think that on those hours of operation that the officers have suggested, particularly on a Sunday, you need time for the family to obviously be together and so on and so forth. And I think we need to keep those hours that have been suggested by the officers as appropriate for weekend trading.
Thanks, Alderman James.
Mulder. I'm going to rely on my memory and quote you, Mr Mayor. I think there was a time, and it may very well have been on this particular issue, where you said that policy was for the guidance of the wise and the obedience of, and I won't use your words, I'll use the unwise. And I think here we have two particular motions. The first one, in relation to the change in hours, causes me some concern because it is actually policy on the run. This was not discussed on Friday, and it turned up as an amended situation this afternoon, which made me go right back through the briefing papers and all the things and have a look at it from a new perspective. Normally I wouldn't do it, but it's rolled up with something else that I think is quite important. Policy of councils is something that the staff do not have discretion to apply. They must apply. That's the nature of the policy decision. But whether it applies to particular circumstances is a judgment for us to make. And that is the judgment that we're being asked to make now. What we're looking for is $85,000 in the original motion to create 17 spaces which customers of that particular restaurant will probably never use. So we're asking this person to invest in the convenience of customers half a kilometre down around the road. This man will never get a return on this car parking money because we have no intention of building a car park in that particular area to accommodate the vehicle. So he's paying for spaces for other people's customers. This is a unique situation. And if you think about the purpose of the policy, and I'm reading from the website, amongst the objectives is listed encourage investment and ensure adequate car parking to serve staff and customers. This is, so I would just like to know that this is obviously serving the customers and staff of other people, and it's unjust to ask this man to pay that contribution. Particularly when, if you have a look around there, is that the policy applies to the central business zone, the general business zone, the local business zone and the commercial zone. Guess what? This pavilion is in none of those. So the policy actually doesn't apply to this particular zone. There's a really good reason for not applying the policy at all, which is what I thought we were going to do tonight, but there was an amendment which came which said we're going to charge him 20 instead of nothing. I really think there are some grounds to challenge this fee even at the $20,000 level mark. So I was there yesterday to look at the parking thing. Now yesterday was a place where Bellarive, from Wentworth Street up the top of Waverley Street, just about all of the Bluff, was chock-a-block full because everyone was lining up because of the inadequate parking next to the Bellarive Oval. And if you walk from the Clarence Hotel or Seabar or something it's called these days, you walk along the foreshore. All the car parking spaces were occupied, as they were through most of the streets, anywhere near the Bellarive Oval. But when you got to the shop, this particular site, there was no cars parked out the front of it. There were 2 cars parked in the car parking space. So even at a peak parking demand, there was no one in this particular car park. And as the proponent says, it's his intention to, his business model is to deal with the pedestrians and the cyclists who will be the main customers there and a takeaway shop. And really I don't see how we can apply this policy on this business, particularly given the fact that in this particular area we are desperate to use something. This person is investing a significant amount of money to do up one of our dilapidated old buildings.
Of ours.
Isn't it?
It's the Crown. Order, please, order. It belongs to the Crown.
It belongs to the people. Yep, and I think I'm still one of them, so it's ours. So I thank you for the interjection to clarify the fact that the Crown is not divisible. So here we are. He's spending all this money on this thing to updo it, to create something that's sorely needed in a small business area, and we want to whack him with an $85,000 fine to build car parking spaces that will benefit other places, not him. So I support the motion, although I wish it was 0 cash in lieu.
Other speakers? Alderman Bomberto? Sorry, Alderman Bomberto, you have the nod. Sorry.
Okay. Thank you. Mr Mayor, I actually believe that we need to look very carefully at the parking and access code. Obviously, that is the major issue. I realise that now there's been a second alternative motion as compared to the first one that was emailed to us. This is the second one, which actually has now the trading hours. But the major issue is actually the parking. The important thing to keep in mind is that with the type of planning scheme that we have, it's actually performance-based. So we have the acceptable solutions. In relation to this particular development, if you actually look at what is required by the acceptable solutions, then what is actually being envisaged, particularly by the proponent and even by the officers, is severely deficient. However, after the decision of Henry Design related to 6 Venice Street, we've become clearer in relation to performance criteria. So when we get to the performance criteria, we no longer look at those performance criteria as compared to the acceptable solutions. So I think that's really important to keep in mind, because I'm going to come back to that. When you actually look at the purpose of the parking and access code, some of the components are that the purpose of this provision is to ensure enough parking is provided for a use or development to meet the reasonable requirements of users, including people with disabilities, ensure sufficient parking is provided on site to minimise on-street parking and maximise the efficiency of the road network, and also ensure that all proposed use and development is specified in specified activity centres provide sufficient on-site parking and or contributes towards the development of any existing and or any required future public parking facilities within the proximity of the site. When we actually get to the performance criteria, the performance criteria actually says the number of on-site car parking spaces must be sufficient to meet the reasonable needs of users, having regard to all of the following, all of them. Car parking demand, the availability of on-street and public car parking in the locality, the availability and frequency of public transport within 400 metres walking distance of the site, the availability and likely use of other modes of transport, the availability and suitability of alternative arrangements for car parking provision. Then it also relates to I'm missing out a couple here, but the appropriateness of financial contribution in lieu of parking towards the cost of parking facilities and or transport facilities where such facilities exist or are planned in the vicinity. So there's actually a number of components that we actually need to look at. And I think that very first one, car parking demand, is really important. And under E65 of the planning scheme, council can actually ask the proponent for an assessment by a suitably qualified person of parking demand created by a use or development. And I think that's a really key thing here. I've heard from a number of people. I've heard from Alderman Newington. I've heard from some of the staff. I've heard from other people that there seems to be enough parking in the area. I actually believe that we need to have...
Alderman Edmonds.
I'll be very sharp. I think we... Sorry?
Please, look, please keep the interjections out of it. We do need to give people the opportunity to speak unfettered, and everyone will have that opportunity. Thanks, Alderman.
Okay. So first of all, I'll just make a comment. A few of us have spoken about having the guts to run for council, and I would... Obviously, we haven't had our declarations come out yet, but I would wager that perhaps within this room we might not come up to $85,000. I think it's a very high fence to set somebody who's starting a business outside where the intention of the charges lay. Whether $20,000 is where I personally would have landed is not really up for debate, because this is what we have in front of us, and I'll be supportive of it. I have concerns about the hours. I'm actually supportive of the hours proposed, but I think plenty of us spoke a lot about consultation in this election campaign, and I think we would have to consult on that, unfortunately. So I am, obviously, this is my first meeting, and in fact my first speech. Is there a pathway forward with these two motions where they're voted on separately?
Unfortunately not. With our procedures, we have to either pass or reject this one, and if it's rejected, then an alternative motion could be put up. At this stage, Alderman James has nominated that he's going to move the officer's recommendation if this motion fails.
But not in terms of splitting up the dollar figure and the hours of operations? No. Okay. And I just would make a comment on our side of the river, that we, for people, not just at my age, but generally, we lack a bit of buzz. And I think developments such as this would be the talk of the town. So that's another reason why I think we should do what we can to support them to get established.
Thank you, Mayor. Mayor, I'm sort of in a dilemma. Alderman Ewington's motion because it does get things moving, but we've actually got a pier which we made wider so the public could use it as well. And people say to me, I've heard people say, well, there's plenty of parking around there. I went round there the other night and there wasn't, or when I say night, evening, and there wasn't a lot of parking there. I noticed the car park right next to this building. It's got 9 spots, 9 car spaces. But again, that car park wasn't put there for the restaurant. It was put there for everybody to use. And I can see a real dilemma with this restaurant because I believe it will be very successful. I believe it will be very successful. The fact is, even when I first read the officer's report, I was a bit surprised that the hours of operation were so limited. I could not believe that myself, at least with Alderman Ewington's motion. I mean, they are extended. Now, when we say car parking, I read here on page 104 there'll be an estimated 10 staff and 80 customers on site at any one time. Now, even if that's an exaggeration, we're certainly going to need a lot more spaces that are there. And I can see, regardless of the money, if it's 20,000 or 80,000, I can see that somewhere along the line we're going to need more spaces because I can imagine, I looked at that esplanade and I looked at the houses right where this is. It's a very narrow part of the street. So I can see we're probably going to be forced to put limitations on parking there because people will be parking right on the corner, which we do not want. I'm all for people having a go, and one of the reasons why, and probably one of the only reasons why I can support this motion, because I've seen this building change to different uses about 4 times, and nothing's ever looked like it's going to be a success there. Now, there's something very similar I remember on Adelaide Beach, something very similar to this proposal, and I think this is a great proposal for the area. I don't like the fact that we're starting to cut changes, we're changing hours, we're changing cash in lieu. I don't like that. I think that's something that, you know, that we've got to sort of look at. We can't keep doing it every motion. But look, I'll support this motion of Alderman Ewington's because I want to see it go ahead. I want to see something down there that really is vibrant. But I do warn people though that this cash in lieu thing, we've already looked at multi-storey car parks in both Bellreeve and at Rosny, and we've got Kangaroo Bay. So we've got to think carefully before we just keep saying, oh, no one pays cash in lieu, you know, for car parking, because really it's something that, you know, if we don't take it off somebody, it's got to come from the other ratepayers and not even in the area.
Thank you, Alderman Pearce. Other speakers?
Thank you. We're currently sitting as the Planning Authority. The Planning Authority is a statutory straitjacket. Now, you can twist a bit, there's a bit of wiggle, but at the end of the day, it does have constraints. The highest point of agreement, I think, is that we all believe this is a positive development. We believe that there is comfort from what the officers have said that this should go ahead. We seem to be stuck in a situation around what's reasonable around car parks. And there's the motion that we're dealing with now. There is the officer's recommendation that Alderman James has set, and I potentially foreshadow the alternate that I've provided. But I just want to say this, we have the power to work this through. It could potentially, you know, painful as this sounds, there could be 4 or 5 iterations of this debate, and we can come to an answer. If that's what it takes, that's what it takes. It isn't winner take all on this motion or the next. So bear that in mind. The motion that I will, the foreshadowed, that I'd be talking about, I feel now the need to perhaps bring some of those components forward. When dealing as a council, I think it's pretty important that we be responsive, but that it's generally seen as a level playing field. And we do want entrepreneurs to get up and have a go. We want young people, especially in the catering industry, to get up and have a go. And I'd say that's what people in places like Gascow East have done. You know, they have been up, if I recall that application, there was a certain number of parks associated with that site. Then they were charged the Bellreeve rate for another 8 parks. So again, is this council saying that we're going to have an element of cronyism around how we go about this? We do need to be fair, and if we are a little bit cavalier on this matter, then you may well find that if you're the owner of if you are any business at any time that's ever had cash in lieu asked, that you may wish to have a go at getting it back and perhaps ask for some interest as well. Let's see how we go with this one, see how we go potentially with the alternate, see how we might go with mine. We can do this a couple of times. What I was proposing, or foreshadow to is something that I've worked out around 10, and I hope the opportunity presents for me to discuss how I came to that.
Mr. Mayor, thank you. And I've enjoyed the debate and the contribution of colleagues this evening, and congratulate Alderman Ewington on his motion tonight. I've got to say my position earlier today was where Alderman Mulder landed as well, which was, and if he was to foreshadow waiving that the cash in lieu payment, I'd be supportive of that. And there's a very clear reason why I'd be supportive of that. It's because small and medium-sized businesses are the backbone of this country. And with 3,124 SMEs in the city of Clarence, they play an enormous role. They contribute significantly to this city. I'm getting there, Mr. Mayor. I'm getting there because it is tough out there. It's very tough out there. And recent ASIC statistics show that most SMEs fall over in the first 12 to 18 months, and the main reason being cash flow. And if we're going to whack a small business owner with an $85,000 fee, under the original proposal was $170,000, well, how's that going to go down? That's a lot of coffees to sell before that kind of money's recouped. So, and just because it might be the way this council has operated previously, doesn't make it the right way into the future. We need to very clearly nail our colours to the mast and say that Clarence is now open for business. We support entrepreneurial spirit. We support those people that put everything on the line. They put everything on the line, and the hours of operation that Alderman Ewington is proposing is a sensible outcome. This is the way that this business may make some money. This is much more reasonable, what we're proposing here. I mean, on a Sunday in public holidays, not opening before 10 a.m. I mean, it's ludicrous to any of us that have been in the hospitality industry. It's an absolute joke. I congratulate Alderman Ewington on his motion, and I'm very proud to support it, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Alderman Blomley. Alderman Chong.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I guess up front, I will not be supporting this motion of Alderman Ewington's, and there are a couple of reasons for that. Firstly, I have consistently been a supporter of cash in lieu for parking. I believe if you add to the parking load through doing something in our city, in a particular area, that it's incumbent that you help pay for that parking. Now, that doesn't matter whether you're in Belrive, whether you're in Richmond, whether you're in the other centres which are listed in the code, so that there are specific amounts mentioned for some areas, like Belrive. Other centres are determined by the cost of building parking in those areas. Now, I could be persuaded that the number of parking spaces could be reduced. Absolutely, I think there's an argument that can be made that many of the people who will visit will be local, or will be walking along the track, or will be cycling, and that you perhaps don't need as many car parking spaces. But I certainly can't be persuaded that we should be reducing the amount that we have to pay. Now, when you consider what's been asked, $10,000 in the Belrive particular area, that's been reduced to $5,000 in this particular instance because council already owns the land. So the cost is determined by the city engineer, group manager engineering, to actually bring those car parking spaces up to a standard is $5,000, slightly over $5,000, but capped at $5,000. So logically, even if we accept the 8 spaces as a somewhat arbitrary number, I suspect, it should still be $40,000. $20,000 seems to have no basis in any logic to me at all. If we accept that our manager of engineering understands what is needed to build those car park spaces, that's the amount we should be using, and that's what we should base it on. So for those reasons, I cannot support this motion.
Thank you. Right, a reply, Alderman Newington.
Mr. Mayor. I just wanted to address the issue of the opening hours side of things. The original meeting the other day, we were led to believe that was the proponent who requested those hours, but after speaking with him, he advised that he would prefer to have longer hours, so that's why I put them in there, because I said to him, well, how can you make $1 out of those sort of hours? And I think I thought it was wise to sort of address that issue now. We talk about transparency, in the community. Well, let's be transparent. Why go in lower and then try and ask the community later to deal with it? I think and I think that's what makes, as Brendan Alderman Bromley said, it makes common sense. How can you make something work when you can't even open at peak times when you want to be able to do these things? Alderman von Berto, when you addressed the issue about parking, taking into account all the other issues in relation to what's there, I mean, walking, riding, transport, all those sorts of things. And I think the argument you put forward supported the fact that there isn't that need for as many car parks as what the officers have recommended.
Order, please. Just to stop this sort of reaction and interruption.
I need to clarify that.
If you could direct your actions through the chair rather than personally to the other alderman, then it avoids that connotation. Alderman James, thanks.
Well, the issues were raised by Alderman von Berto in terms of how many people would walk, how many people come to the local area, local public transport, all those sorts of things. The people that are there using the track would use would be there using the track, will use the business and get a coffee or an ice cream or something as well. So they're already there using. It's not an extra person. Some of them are just already there on the track anyway. So look, I summed it up at the beginning. I think the sentiment there is I think there's a good sentiment to say that we can address and look at the cost of the proponent in the beginning, and I appreciate the other alderman at least acknowledging that that's the situation. And I'd love to see us, like I said, show the community that we're open for business, that we're going to support local people. I mean, I'll go back to what the vision says at the front of the book there, to be the best city in which to live, enjoy, recreation and to develop or expand a business. I think we're at that point now where we want to do that, and I think this is a perfect opportunity to send a message out to the community that that's what we're here to do.
Thank you. So the motion before the chair is the officer's recommendation for approval subject to conditions and advice as amended to cash in lieu's 20,000 and trading hours Monday to Saturday inclusive 8 a.m. to 9 p.m. and Sunday 8 a.m. to 4 p.m. All those in favour? Against? That motion is lost 6-all. Alderman James.
I move the officer's recommendation as listed in the agenda.
Thank you. Do we have a seconder?
Before we move on to that, there seems to be some disquiet.
Can I seek some advice?
Yeah, sure. Look, just by way of explanation, if a motion is tied, it is deemed lost. And so 6-all is a loss. And that goes right across any sort of motion the council takes. Sorry, I should have explained that.
I was suggesting there was some confusion about who had and hadn't raised their hand at what point, and I was just suggesting, Mr Mayor, that perhaps if we did have another show of hands to clarify that.
I thought I saw a show from everyone. General Manager?
I haven't had a chance to write down all the names yet.
Look, given there is uncertainty, all those in favour of the motion? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Against? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6.
Sorry,
I wanted to seek some advice before we had that vote, if possible.
An abstention.
Who abstained?
No, I wasn't ready for the vote.
I think you was abstaining.
The first time I registered you against the motion because I thought I saw your hand go up.
Yeah, but this I hate what's happening.
This motion's lost.
No, that's not true. I'm happy to recommit it.
Seeking a recount.
Particularly,
I'm not going to play those games. I'm not changing my vote, so you don't need to.
So, did I correctly observe you vote against the motion?
I did.
Okay. So, the motion is lost 6-all. Thanks, Alderman Edmonds, for clarifying that.
Can I just clarify another point too, Mr Mayor? During Alderman Mulder's discussion, a contribution, may I ask through you, Chair, did Alderman Mulder foreshadow a motion?
Not that I was aware of. I took a foreshadowed motion from Alderman James and then one from Alderman Walker. That's why I read it. Alderman James.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I move the recommendation.
Do we have a seconder for the officer's recommendation?
Thank you.
In that case, Alderman Walker. And I take it you're going to move what's been circulated?
For want of a seconder, I'm going to move the motion as I circulate.
Do we have a seconder for Alderman Walker's motion? Thank you, Alderman Warren. Alderman Walker.
Thank you. Look, currently this building is dilapidated. The proposal is likely to improve amenity, economic benefit, and I do appreciate the points raised by the proponent when he addressed the council earlier. As I said, it's a good proposal. It's been worked through, and the sticking point is around parking. In matters past, when contributions have been required, I've often challenged the methodology, but I've not challenged the actual contribution process itself. And the issue of fairness really should be borne in mind by Aldermen. And here's the bind. Yes, the allocated car parks are indeed a capital improvement to that building. It becomes more valuable for having those car parks. But as has happened, and as does happen with other situations around, that is the landlord, I guess, gets that capital improvement. And the matter of that is something that gets negotiated between a lessee and a landlord. But I think a level playing field is a reasonable expectation for all businesses in the City of Clarence. If this was 100 metres up the road, say if the proposal was in a renovated, unoccupied auto-electric business in Belreeve Village, it would be requiring a $10,000 car park contribution. As many others have paid in this area. Let's ask the people at the Belreeve Health Hub, let's ask the people at the medical practice, and as I said before, let's ask the young couple chasing their dreams with an entrepreneurial cafe restaurant business at Gastown East, because that proposal had the requirement of car parking paid in lieu. That lease with that building, with that business and the landlord, it was something to be negotiated between them to take into account that capital improvement that was there. I guess the question is, how much hock do you want this council to go in if we reimburse every contribution we've ever made plus interest on it? And what will that do to strategies paying for, as we've done in areas like Percy Street, purchasing premises to turn them into car parks, or possibly even a decked car park? Yep, support business, transparency and a level playing field, and on the matter of fairness and around certainty. Like all businesses in Clarence that have undergone a major renovation, this development, if approved, will be entitled to ask for the first year emission of rates. Is that not correct, General Manager?
Yeah, that's depends on
the... Of a major renovation?
It's the difference in capital value between the unimproved capital value and the improved capital value.
So it's not a carte blanche remission, but it will certainly be a significant help. In thinking around the alternates around parking, I came to the number of 10. Now, this proposal is out of the Belreeve zone, and why 10? Well, I'm actually still conservatively hypothecating that most people, when you ask for a contribution of 10, drive to the site. Now, that's probably not the case. The business model seems to be more targeted for locals, or that are in the area, that will be walking there, perhaps cycling on the shared pathway. But that is a reasonable and a conservative approach to this process. The impact of this commercial endeavour doesn't create scarcity issues for other commercial providers immediately around that site. But it does have an impact on parking in the area, and that contribution will be used to improve parking in that area. There is parking there, and there will be continue to be, I guess, parking in the immediate adjoining streets that can be utilised. This is a new council, and I guess I'm really apprehensive about major policy being determined tonight around the council on a motion. That is not good. That is not platinum process around formulating policy. So I think we're up for a parking strategy workshop pretty soon, but let's do that at a workshop. Let's not do this tonight on the run. you may be more inclined to be supporting the motion that Richard James put or the motion that Alderman Newington put. I hope what I'm proposing is a sensible middle ground and based on a degree of rationality and rigour, and I have noted points through the motion.
Thanks, Alderman Walker. Alderman Warren, a seconder.
I know that some aldermen ran on a platform of pro-business, and I ran on a platform of pro-residence, and I noticed on the front cover it says to live, enjoy recreation, and the promote business is the third point there. So if we need to upgrade the parking and we don't accept cash in lieu, where does that money come from? It comes from the general budget for roads and maintenance, which means it comes from somewhere else. We have to change our priorities. So what else would not be done because we were spending the money upgrading these parking spots? So in the end, the residents pay for the parking. So I think that it's reasonable to expect that the business owner makes some contribution. I like the idea of there being some flexibility around that, perhaps some remission in rates in the first year. But I think essentially we have to protect the residents to make sure we're not disadvantaging them by promoting the business.
Thank you. Other speakers? Alderman Mulder.
Thank you. I reluctantly rise to support this particular motion because my opening game, which I thought we were going to be talking about after Friday's briefing, was 0. Then over the weekend it evolved into 20, and now we're up to 50. So I guess it's a question of the longer this goes on, the worse it seems to get, and I really do feel for the proponent being put through this particular ringer. I can simply say that all the arguments that I put before still apply. And if we're talking about asking people, now I can thoroughly understand why someone who is within close proximity of where we intend in the future to build multi-storey car parks to cope should make a contribution to those parking spaces because they're making an investment in their own business for the future customers and the ease of parking in their areas. When you are talking for something that is half a kilometre away that no one who uses that restaurant will ever park in your particular car parks, you are taking money off that person to support someone else's business. Now, it's not a question of just amending policy or major policy on the run. We have, as a council, sometimes when I was here and sometimes when I wasn't, waived this policy. If you have a look at the policy and you look at the planning scheme, it actually says that council can waiver the policy. It's built in there. If there are, as all these things, if there are good reasons. Here's a good reason. Why would we penalise a business operator who is investing in our city, who wants to build, who wants to renovate and create an exciting opportunity that we're all in agreement on, and then we ask him to pay a contribution for some business up around the corner? We have no intention of using any of that money to build a multi-storey car park next to his premises, and by the way, there's room for it. We could do that, and if we were to do that, I would say hit him the 20 grand because he's investing in the parking space of his business. The fact that most people seem to think he doesn't actually need that many, or any, just simply says that here is a case of flexibility. As I said before, the parking policy applies to the zones that I mentioned in my previous contribution. This property is not in one of those zones, and therefore the car parking policy doesn't even apply. And I think that if you got some advice on that, you might have a good excuse irrespective of the decision of this council. In conclusion, should this motion fail, I will be now foreshadowing one which says the officer's recommendation as listed with the deletion of A.3, which is the cash in lieu contribution.
Alderman James.
It's very interesting, Mr Mayor, to hear Alderman Mulder's comments when in fact it would never have got up at 0. I don't think anybody around this chamber would in fact support that because of the need to provide some parking and to take cash in lieu. Also, too, there has been discussion, Mr Mayor, in Alderman Mulder's absence, that we have discussed the multi-storey car park, and one of the areas is behind the Belrive Quay building. So, in your absence, it has been discussed.
To me.
Okay, thirdly, Alderman Mulder made the comment that council can waive its policy. Yes, it can, but it has to give very good reasons why it's waiving its policy. And fourthly, on page 110 of the documentation, it refers to, amongst other things, and this is the officer's report, the council's group manager engineering has said that the estimated construction cost per space, and in accordance with, Alderman Mulder, with the...
Alderman James, look, please do not address Alderman Mulder directly. You must address your comments through me.
In accordance with the adopted Bellreeve Bluff landscape plan would be 5,000. So it's actually within the landscape plan of Bellreeve Bluff that has specified 5,000. The other thing is, it's quite interesting, Mr Mayor, that you supported the actual motion that was considered a few moments ago. This is basically contrary to our policy and procedures, which you have said publicly that you would support to the T. And here you are, in the last instance, voting against council's policies and procedures. And that, to me, is basically defeats the whole purpose of what you advocated last Wednesday. In conclusion, I will not support this motion. I believe it's appropriate for us to at least earmark a multi-storey car park. And may I say, back in 2003, Alderman Von Bird, I stand corrected on this, supported me when the Bellreeve Oval redevelopment was in hand, and the officers suggested at the time there was adequate parking, and therefore the 999 spaces should be waived, and therefore this council was denied 990, or just short of $1 million, because there was adequate parking in that area. Look what we got today. That is a typical example of where at that time we should have earmarked those monies for a multi-storey car park. We didn't, and now we're saying it should be zero, Mr Mayor, for waiving parking when there is a need for it. And I will not support this, and even if it comes out in the press...
The motion before the Chair is actually Alderman Walker's motion.
Yes,
we're not at the stage yet of debating, and we may not get there, of debating Alderman Mulder's motion. So if you could please confine yourself.
That's okay. But the point about it is that Alderman Walker basically has been an advocate of supporting council's policies, and now he comes up with a figure of 50,000 because it basically says there is a suitable car parking in the area. There's a large number of patrons which will come by foot rather than that. And what has he been doing in the last instance when we were talking about the doctor's surgery? He was steadfast in his appointment for the $10,000. How in the hell can we go on one instance,
can you just be careful
support that, and then on the other hand come up with a fictitious figure of 50,000? There's a shortfall in parking here, and there's no way in the world, Mr Mayor, are we able to put a multi-storey car park, which I believe is appropriate when we are debating on reducing our parking plan, as endorsed by the Bellreeve Bluff landscape plan, which has been identified at 5,000 per space.
Thanks, Alderman James. I might add that I was correctly quoted earlier as saying policy's there for the guidance.
Yes, I know. You can bend the rules. I know.
Alderman Edmondson.
Edmonds.
Sorry, Edmonds.
It's okay. I just, considering the circumstances before with what happened with the vote, I just want to make some brief comments. And that is primarily that I couldn't come at an hour's change without consulting with the community.
Thank you. Any other speakers? Alderman Pearce, Alderman Pearce and then Alderman Chong.
Oh, that's all right. Look, Mayor, I'm going to support Alderman Walker's recommendation because, look, let's just get back to what this is about. It's about change of use to restaurant additions and alterations. You think the only thing we were discussing tonight is car parking? This is about a restaurant. So either you support it and vote for a restaurant, or you vote against it, there's no restaurant. That's what.
Look, Alderman Pearce, I can understand the intensity of this debate, but we really have to keep focused.
That's what's going to happen, though.
Thank you, Alderman Pearce. Alderman Chong.
Thank you, Peter. I'll ask you a question, please. When we've charged cash in lieu to people before, we've given them the capacity to pay over a couple of years. Is that something that we should consider putting as a condition in here, or is it just something?
Alderman Ewington did have that.
Yes, I know you did. There isn't obviously in this one. Does it need to be in a condition, or is it just a negotiation?
Perhaps I could ask the mover and seconder if they're prepared to take out of Alderman Ewington's move that it be paid over a period of 2 years?
Currently the motion is silent on the payment schedule.
Yeah.
I am happy to go for I'm happy to stipulate a duration, but I guess I would take advice from the General Manager and the Chief of City Planning as to is there a length of time where where it's problematic if it's the duration is increased.
General Manager.
Through Mr Mayor, it's not required to be reflected in the motion. We can adequately deal with it administratively and through the conditions and through the requirements of the actual condition.
Silence is golden.
Thank you. Alderman Chong, if you finish.
No, that's fine.
Alderman von Berdo.
Mr Mayor, I come back to my points that I was making. Obviously, I've got too many points to make in the time that I'm allowed to make them. I believe that we have not sufficiently looked at the car parking demands. So we could have required that the applicant actually had a suitably qualified person to do an assessment of the car parking demands. What I'm hearing is from various people who do not have expertise in relation to what the car parking demands are. That is the first thing that we need to look at. And when Alderman Mulder actually speaks about the policy is in the planning scheme. It is either the acceptable solutions or it is the performance criteria. We are looking at the performance criteria, and the performance criteria, as I actually read out, and I'm sure everyone has actually looked at those performance criteria, I would hope so, or for performance criterion in relation to this particular one, P1 of E661, that the first thing there is actually car parking demand. We don't know what the car parking demand is because there has not been an assessment done. We could have actually got the proponent to get a suitably qualified person to do that assessment. That has not occurred. So for me, I cannot actually make a sensible decision in relation to this because I don't know what the demand is. Yes, I can look at all of the other aspects, and some of those actually make me think that perhaps we don't need to actually charge the amount that would be required as far as the acceptable solution is concerned. But I do not have all of the information to make a sensible decision. And what is happening now is we're making an arbitrary decision. With the first motion that we had, that was arbitrary. This is now another arbitrary one. What I am saying is that we actually need to make a decision in relation to whether or not anything is charged, and if so, what, by actually making an informed decision. So that is my point. The other aspect I think we need to think about is that with Mr Graham's assessment of the cost, we need to also look at whether or not this is for additional car parking or whether it's for formalising existing car parking. Now, I know that is perhaps a play on words, but it is important. At the moment, there is parking there, but it is not formalised. So, with looking at whether or not we charge anything, are we looking at actually new or additional car parking? Because that is another key aspect. So at the moment, there's a number of questions that are unanswered for me.
Thank you. Alderman Blomley.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Mr Mayor, I may have been out of this place for a decade, but the memories come flooding back when fellow aldermen start dictating or surmising or guessing how other aldermen will act or ought to act in this place. So Alderman Mulder, I note, foreshadowed that he was going to seek, if this motion was unsuccessful, seek to waive the cash in lieu component. Is that correct, Alderman Mulder? Thank you. Now, I don't know whether this should be acceptable to Alderman Mulder.
If we can take Alderman Walker's
well, I
motion first.
Well, sure. I mean, someone said before this is all about car parking. It's not. Alderman Pearce correctly pointed out this is about business. And it's central to business success is operational hours that will actually allow these people to turn a profit. Actually allow these people to provide a service during the hours that the customers, predominantly the residents of our great city, need. So I will also just add, Mr. Mayor, this is what I was attempting to come to, was that the hours of operation, the trading hours that Alderman Newington had in his original list of amendments, I'd seek to have them incorporated. If it's acceptable, if this motion is unsuccessful, foreshadow, I'd seek to have those incorporated in Alderman Mulder's motion. If that's not acceptable to him, I foreshadow that I will then seek, if these two motions are unacceptable, to move a subsequent motion reflecting those two positions. One, that the cash in lieu component be waived altogether, and two, that the hours of operation, the trading hours, as presented in Alderman Ewington's motion, be considered by this council. I mean, to me, this is a no-brainer. An absolute no-brainer. And the fact that people can stand here and say, oh, there's a policy. We've got to follow the policy. Well, I think it's pretty obvious to most people there's been a 50% change in personnel to this body. And if that's not a wake-up call, I don't know what is. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Other speakers? Right, reply, Alderman Walker.
Thank you. Look, a couple of points should be brought into this matter. Alderman James brought up the medical surgery. Did I have a go at the quantum of funds for that? No, I didn't. I had a go at the methodology. Did I base that on some arbitrary wave breeze? No, it might have had to do with my experience in practice management, sitting on the national board of that, being involved in community practice for a long time. Understanding that practice there is a quality medicine practice, not a 3-minute medicine practice that might require the type of car parking that you think would be required. Indeed, Mr. Mayor, indeed. Look, I would like to point out again what is the Clarence interim parking plan. The key component is that the new performance criteria does allow council to vary the required numbers, although in making such planning decisions it's important to remain consistent and objective in order to preserve fairness and ensure long-term sustainability to those decisions. I believe the proposal for 10 car parks is consistent, it is preserving fairness and it is ensuring long-term sustainability. I commend this motion and seek at least 6 others to come along with me.
Thank you very much. So the motion before the Chair is the officer's recommendation, except that Clause 3 has cash in lieu has been amended to $50,000 for 10 spaces. All those in favour? Against? The motion is carried. Now for the easy ones. I don't think so. Item 11.3.5 is a development application at 99 Pipe Clay Esplanade, Cremorne, for a dwelling addition. Do we have someone willing to move the officer's recommendation, please? Alderman James, thank you.
I move, Mr. Mayor.
And I'll second it, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Alderman Von Berto. Alderman James.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and I did listen very carefully to the gentleman who spoke at the beginning of the meeting, and I think it's summarised quite well on page 18, or a correction on the on page 26 of 117, and those items, dot points that have been shown under 6.5 summary, really I think indicate really what we're about here. It's a very sensitive area of Cremorne Spit, as distinct from another section or location further along Frederick Henry Parade, and a number of us attended a meeting on Saturday morning and we discussed, amongst other things, development not only on Frederick Henry Parade but also on the Cremorne Spit. So in summary, and the officer's recommendation has gone through in detail as to why the sensitivity and the nature of this development will impact upon, we don't have as such, but a coastal policy, but I know that Alderman Bonberto and Alderman McFarlane were very keen to have this up and running, and there is some progress with regard to that, and we look forward to actually having some policy which the state government can actually tick off in relation to it. But getting back to this matter before us, I don't want to go through each of the points on page 26 of 117, but suffice to say that a sediment analysis has indicated that the site is vulnerable to erosion. GES has not encountered the basis of the sandy deposit layers. Now, you will recall that there's been two reports. There's been one that the officers, of course, have commissioned, and secondly, there's the report from the applicant, the developer, and his advisor or advisors. The other point, and I'll only mention this in passing, the on-site dunes are vegetated and have a well-developed soil profile indicating steady state conditions and therefore not classified as mobile. So in other words, there is that propensity for the dunes over time to be obviously inundated and also expose the site to larger offshore waves from those easterly northerly wind fetch. So rather than go on with those comments, I will go back to the officer's recommendation and basically summarise in a nutshell that it is in a very, very sensitive area. I think we need to be conscious of where this particular development is occurring, is being developed, and also to the fact that there is, within Council's 2050 predictions, that the tidal movements and the inundation that may occur, and we cannot say it may necessarily occur in 2050, it may even occur sooner rather than later. So therefore we have to be cognizant of the fact that this particular development is in the wrong area, and the scale of it, I think, will be a concern not only to those persons who have concerns about the development in this area of the spit. So I seek council support.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. I think the important aspect to note here is that the development does not actually meet the Coastal Erosion Hazard Code and the acceptable solutions in relation to that, and therefore we then need to go to the performance criteria. And as you can all see and appreciate on page 138, it actually makes it very clear that the buildings and works must satisfy all of the following. And the planning staff have actually used the GES and the Pitt and Sherry reports, so both, to determine that all of those aspects of P1 are not met, and therefore that actually means that there is a major issue in relation to this development. I think it's really important that we focus obviously on the planning scheme, but we also need to focus on the precautionary principle. When something of this nature comes up, we need to actually be very careful in looking at what we are allowing to occur. The 2009 report on which our planning scheme is based in terms of the aspects of coastal issues has obviously been in place for a number of years, for 10 years now. However, it is the only report that we have at this point in time to be able to focus on. It does need to be updated, but at this point This is what we actually have to use as the basis, and we have used as the basis for our scheme. So, with that in mind, I believe that we actually need to support the officer's recommendation. However, I do feel that we need to review this particular report as soon as possible. I would envisage that it would come after we have actually looked at, considered and adopted a Clarence coastal policy, and that then this would come within a strategy that actually implements that coastal policy. So I support the officer's recommendation.
Hold on. I can understand all the reasons why council wouldn't want to do and get involved in this, but I can also, when I look at the plans, I can see this house isn't stuck on a spit in the middle of nowhere, waiting for some projected erosion to occur. There is actually a house below it, and there's a house above it that is in the same erosion zone areas, and depending on which diagram you look, it's either low or medium. But if you look at that, the house next door on the upside has had extensive renovations done to it in recent times. It has been turned into some decks and some refurbishment. What I'm really concerned about is we're saying to this person here, you can't even renovate it, as we heard from the deputation. They want to get it under there that needs re-stumping or it's going to fall over. So where do we stand with this stuff? Here's someone who actually wants to roll the dice and say, well, it's only an erosion protection. Why shouldn't I be allowed to build my house? And if it falls into the ocean and it gets eroded, that's the risk I take. That's the risk I take. But I can see also that in a way council can't resolve itself of its liability. And my question is the renovation that was done on the top side, was that approved by council? Did that get a tick from here? In which case, are we not also liable for anything that happens in that particular area? So I'm really concerned about this because here we have a modest development, some of which is actually required to stop the house from falling down. And we're saying to this person, you can't do this renovation. You can't put a deck on the outside. You can't do this and you can't do that because we have a prediction, and it depends which one you look at. I'm talking about figure 5 at 4.4.3 of the study. And I won't waste time. And it's got, the house in the medium zone. And I just have some concerns that, had we said to this person, what engineering works are required, to prevent the soil erosion or something like that, we might have done something. But even as an interim measure, I'm not sure what the predicted time is. I haven't quite recalled that, to say what it is. I'm also a little bit tired, Mr Mayor, and I've only been here for about an hour this time, of being lectured on how policy, as if it were the law of the Medes and Persians, yet we all know that we have discretion in these matters, that we can refuse the officer's, we can overturn the officer's recommendation, as we do quite regularly. Where I'm also told that any change needs to be kept and needs to be based on expert reports and expert opinions. Well, let me tell you that the developers are as equally caught as we are. They get this stuff dropped on them with 2 or 3 business days' notice, if they're lucky, to work out what the officer said in order to gather around here and get us and to talk about their community representatives. On this particular one, it's dropped on me on Friday. I don't have time to go and do the research, and if that's what the planning scheme envisages, they'd give us a bit more than 6 weeks to make these sorts of decisions. So, having said that, I'm really struggling with this because I don't have all the details to draft an alternative recommendation. And I still look at it and say, what are we saying to people here? Are we saying you can't even fix your house because someone's made a prediction that sometime in the future the wave patterns might drag your sand away from you? I reckon roll the dice. You've bought the block. You know what it's there. If you want to spend some money and the predictions come true, that's the chance you take.
Other speakers? Alderman Newington.
I suppose, before we talked about equity and how we apply the parking fees to various businesses and approach the same thing, well, I think Alderman Mulder, hit the nail on the head with that one there. I mean, having someone next door who can actually do something, renovate their house, and some planner has drawn a line in the sand and guessed that that's...
Excuse me?
Well, science is a bit difficult, but they drew a line in the sand and said, well, that one's okay, but that one's not. I just find that I can't come to terms with that. I just don't, think that's a fair way to apply it. I mean, as Alderman Mulder said, someone's bought the land, they want to improve, they want to do something to it. There's houses all the way along the Moor that have had in similar situations. I mean, I was in Bullock Street for quite a few years. There's people putting in two-storey places in through there. That's all okay. And someone's drawn a line on a map and said, no, you can't. I just can't see that. I mean, if someone has a block of land, they want to do something with it, I'll let them actually go and do it.
I think it's, I've copped a spray on policy and whether we follow it tonight. And I think it's really important to point out that there is a difference between policy and the law, and planning law, and our requirement to comply with the planning scheme as it exists, which is different from policy which we set and we're at liberty to negotiate and take advice on or not. I just want to clear the air on that because I feel as though policy and planning law are becoming a bit mixed up here. Are there any other speakers? Alderman Walker.
Reluctantly, begrudgingly, I'm in a situation where I am having to support the officer's recommendations. And look, my tip, for what it's worth, and like all advice, it's worth exactly what you're paying for it, which is nothing. But when in doubt, particularly with officers' recommendations for refusal, if you've got significant doubt in your head and it's a refusal, my general inclination is to back in the officer's recommendations. Perhaps with more time, with more discussions, with more information, I may have got to a more educated point where I could mount a refusal with comfort, but I'm not at that place. Now, so I will be supporting the officer's recommendations, or at least voting for it. And, I appreciate how there must be a degree of frustration felt by the proponent. I really do. They have rights. There is the right to challenge a refusal.
Order, please.
That's a right that they may wish to exercise.
Thank you. Other speakers. Alderman Blomley.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Well, I have no difficulty in rising to say that I won't be supporting the officer's recommendation. I think that one reads the GES report commissioned by the proponents. It's pretty clear that albeit there's going to be some challenges into the near future, these are people who are wanting to invest in their property to increase the value, to create a greatly enhanced property here in our city. What message are we sending to them and to everyone else in our city if tonight we say no? We're not going to support this. I think that's absolutely ludicrous. And I'll have more to say tonight on climate change and all that sort of associated stuff as well. But Mr Mayor, those few comments, I'd say that I'm unable to support the officer's recommendation this evening.
Thank you. Other speakers. Right, reply, Alderman James.
Seek council. Seek council's support.
So the motion before the chair is the officer's recommendation for refusal. All those in favour? Against? The motion is carried. That completes our business as a planning authority, and we now move on to other business. There's nothing under customer service, asset management or financial management. So moving on to 11.7. 11.7.1 is the quarterly report to the 30th of September 2018 that it be received by Council. Thanks, Alderman Blomley. Seconder. Thank you, Alderman Chong. Alderman Blomley, do you wish to...
Thank you, Mr Mayor, and I couldn't resist to jump in front of Alderman James there, but I will just draw Alderman's attention to page 32 of the report, Council's Assets and Resources. It's wonderful to see that the State Grants Commission has we've received another $100,000, which is fantastic to see, and clearly, I'd suggest a good reflection upon prudent management of the state level government, which is fantastic to see, Mr Mayor.
If we can keep to the council business, please, Alderman Blomley.
Over the page, Mr Mayor, on page 34, the extensive review of the General Manager's electoral role was undertaken, and I commend the General Manager and the staff for undertaking that work. Clearly, we didn't have the problems faced by the 1,700 odd people enrolled on the Hobart City Council electoral roll, and I think it's a credit to a good, transparent, open governance here in Clarence.
Thank you. Oh, sorry, Alderman Chong seconded it. She has the next opportunity to speak.
Just one very quick question, thank you, Mr Mayor. There's a mention of the Simmons Park Amphitheatre, and I was just wondering what the completion date was likely to be, and will it be before the Jazz Festival?
We're certainly aiming for the amphitheatre work to be all finished ready for the carols, I believe, on Thursday.
Alderman James.
Yes, look, thank you, Mr Mayor. I have two questions, one in relation to page 16, and it's the Risdon Vale change room and toilet. My question through you to Mr Graham, in his capacity as the group manager. Mr Graham, the DA has been circulated, or there's been opportunity for representations or support or otherwise. When do you expect to, well, firstly, has your officers basically got a timetable for work to proceed and start, please?
Through Mr Mayor, no, I need to chase that one up. I'll provide all the order and a brief on the status of that project.
Thank you, Mr Grant.
The second question is in relation to page 24, continuing major projects, and my question is addressed to the Mayor of Clarence, Alderman Chipman. Dot point 2, Alderman Chipman, refers to the Kangaroo Bay Development Precinct. Are you in a position to advise the public that when the Boulevard development proposal comes up and it's discussed at a workshop, will you enable that to be put out to public consultation prior to the DA being circulated?
Thank you for the question, Alderman James. It'll be a matter for this council to decide, not simply the Mayor. Thank you. Are there any other...
That's a good question.
Yes, Mr Mayor, I have three questions. The first one is on page 20, South Arm Oval Master Plan. I'd like to know what was the final decision of the Resource Management and Planning Appeals Tribunal?
Through Mr Mayor, I think there has been a briefing report prepared, but it may have gone out. The Planning Appeals Tribunal have approved the application as issued by Council with one amendment to the noise requirement, and that is that a series of noise tests be undertaken, I think, within 30 days of the commencement of use, and subject to those noise requirements, certain actions as a result of that would be required. I can't remember off the top of my head what they are, but a briefing report certainly has been prepared and is on its way to Alderman now.
And a supplementary, what's the next stage in progressing the decision?
Through Graham, I imagine the next stage is going to tender for costings.
Yes, through Mr Mayor, we're going to do a design and construct tender for the skate park, and so we'll be envisioning that will be out before Christmas.
Thank you. The next question relates to the Sanford Oval. What's the update in relation to the renovation of the Sanford Oval and the club's ability to play on the ground?
Through you, Mr Mayor, I won't say as you're aware because you probably won't be, but Council certainly committed to some significant ground improvements there and entered into a contract with a local turf provider to endeavour to upgrade the ground. As background, I should add that the ground does not have reticulated water and has been traditionally watered from a bore, but rising saline levels and the salinity of the bore have meant the ground deteriorated dramatically over the last couple of years. We've undertaken significant works there. I think the works by and large have been reasonably successful. However, I understand that last week Cricket Tasmania undertook an inspection of the oval and determined that it was not fit for competitive play. So we're currently in the process of examining what options we can to try and bring the ground to an acceptable standard that will enable the cricket club to play games there. In the meantime, I think alternative arrangements have been made for them at another ground.
And my last question relates to page 26, the Roach's speech, sand scraping, and the development of a coastal policy. Of a coastal policy. I'm just wondering where we're at in relation to that draft coastal policy.
Okay, through that, tender has been left and the contract awarded to, I think, SGS, planning to undertake that work on our behalf. And yeah, I expect they're in commencement phase.
Good. Thank you.
Any other questions on the quarterly report? Alderman Walker.
Yes, just back to the Calverton Oval skate park, the matter. You've said that you talked about the noise attenuation components. You don't have the answers off the top of your head, but it was probably around the fact that if it doesn't meet those, that the baffles that have been talked about previously would be to be incorporated.
Yeah, Mr. Lovell can help me out on that one.
As I recall, subject to testing, certain measures would need to be put in place to dampen the noise. I can't recall whether that's a bung or some sort of structure was talked about. And it's certainly
something like that. Just so that we can be clear through the process, because there was a quantum of funds allocated to the project. If we're now at the stage where the tendering process comes up with an answer that substantially exceeds that quantum, how will that be dealt with by council?
Through you, I can't help but mention the use of the word substantially. Yeah, look, if there's any significant variation from the allocated budget, we come back to council for seeking further advice in respect to that.
Any other questions on the quarterly report? In that case, I'll put the motion that it be received. All those in favour? Carried unanimously. 7.2 community support grants amounting to 17,459. I think Alderman James was first there, seconded Alderman Pears. Alderman James.
Yeah, look, thank you, Alderman Pears. I have circulated a copy of the... Perhaps if we could just take a moment to find your copy, Mr Mayor.
Thank you.
It looks like that. And it's got the clock still running, and it's got my name on it, so...
So basically you're supporting the recommendation plus B, which further consideration be given to what other assistance can be provided to the Little Help Group in regard to their LH Let's Roll project.
That's right, and you've quite adequately explained basically what the key part of this motion is, and that is obviously to approve that financial grants as listed, but also the Little Help project, which didn't get a tick in the box, so as to speak, as far as their application for $1,500 is concerned. And may I say, Mr Mayor, that these self-development programs for young girls between the age of 12 and 16 has a very important component to it, and that is it has a self-defence class for 1.5 hours, which is very important, I think, in this day and age for people to learn those skills and so on. And notwithstanding that it hasn't been included in the grant application, the motion part B is for further consideration to be given as to what other assistance can be provided to the Little Help group so that they can continue with their program and assist these young girls to develop these skills as part of the self-development program. I seek council's support.
Thank you. Alderman Pearce?
No, look, I've gone through all these, Mayor, and I think it's pretty straightforward. I don't mind what Alderman James has put because it's only given what other assistance can be provided, so I totally agree with that.
Thank you, Alderman.
I support the motion, but I just rise to express a little concern about point B. No one can, dispute that. But what I don't like inside is the implication that somehow or other council didn't support the aims and ambitions of this really worthwhile project, when in fact I think it's the absolute opposite. And I think it needs for the public record to be pointed out quite clearly that the reason for the rejection for this was not because we don't support those worthy goals, they simply did not meet the criteria, which is not repeat funding. And I think that's an important point to lay on the table. And part B would that would be quite clear to the community at large if you hadn't put part B in there. So I just hope that whoever looks at that actually understands that council is extremely supportive of these sorts of programs, but there are criteria for these things, and on this particular occasion they didn't just meet them. So of course I support the motion, but I think we need to get some of the messages we send right.
Thank you, Alderman. Other speakers?
Yes, I'm going to speak.
Alderman Von Verto.
I can't help myself. I can't see in point B where that would give any misinformation to the community. I think you are being incredibly... I think Alderman Mulder is being incredibly picky.
Yes.
I actually was the only alderman who was able to attend an invitation when this group got their first grant. And I was absolutely impressed by the instructors and the girls and the rapport that they had and the self-confidence that was actually being engendered in what they were doing. So I support Alderman James's motion, and I actually believe that Part B strengthens what we might be able to do within the parameters of what we can do. Thank you.
Alderman Blomley.
Mr Mayor, I move that the motion be put.
Well, that's a procedural motion, so is there a second to that procedural motion? There be. Okay, Alderman Edmonds is seconded, so I'll put the motion that the motion be put. All those in favour? Against? Okay, so all we've done is cut out the right of reply there, so on the basis of that, it may not have been needed anyway. So the recommendation is, as moved by Alderman James, which is the officer's recommendation plus a little bit there. All those in favour? And I think the motion is carried unanimously. Thank you. 11.7.3, Educational Material, Tasmania's Planning System and the Planning Scheme. Are you moving it? Thank you, Alderman Pearce. Do we have a seconder? In the absence of a seconder. Thanks, Alderman Walker. Would you like to speak to it? Alderman Pearce.
Thank you, Mayor. Well, Council write to both the Local Government Association of Tasmania and the Minister for Planning, reiterating the need for the development of suitable material as described in this report. This was, I believe it was Alderman Hume that did a lot of this work. So the Council developed a form to assist people to make representations on both development applications and planning scheme amendments. This information should be available in hard copy and on Council's website. Now look, Alderman Hume, I can't remember everything he said, but I think we support him strongly that a lot of people in the community not quite understand, as you've reiterated tonight, me about the grant spend. It's totally different from just a normal meeting. So I think that a lot of the public could certainly need some help on this, because when the candidates had a forum in town, Dr. Katrina Stevenson, that's one point she made. When you go into a planning authority, it's totally different. And I can say that certain people would certainly like some information on this, because sometimes it's even confusing for us and staff. So I'm quite happy to help with this, and I think this motion certainly needs our support to push it forward.
Thank you. Alderman Walker.
Yes, my seconding of this motion is consistent with how I voted when it was a notice of motion not that long ago. Seems like a whole lot of time ago. There isn't a big administrative impost on this, and it will have many benefits, possibly including a resource that we can give to our dear friends at Hobart City Council when they consider matters like how they go through it step by step with cable car components.
Any other speakers? Alderman Mulder.
Yes, actually, I won't be voting for this motion at all. I was actually in the chamber when I heard the debate, and I must say I wasn't extremely impressed by the need. Let's just have a look. What it called for was that the council write to local government association in the development of reiterating the need for the development of suitable material as described in this report. The other one, when you have a look at the report, it's replete of future planning schemes. Currently available information runs for 1.5, 2 pages, 2.5 pages of currently available information on the public website, available for everyone. And we're going to make some more. Why? Why? You know, and yeah, you're absolutely right. It is confusing to the people in the community, and it's confusing to people who sat around the tables, and it gets more complicated day by day. So what would be the benefit of going beyond the basic material that's available now? And then you have a look at what, page 243 of your papers, with a proposal that we develop a form to assist people, and what's the result? There are risks in attempting, and this is the advice, the professional advice, people, the one that you believe is the law of the Medes and Persians. There are risks in attempting to advise people on scheme interpretation and what matters they may or may not make a representation about. This is particularly so given our understanding of the scheme, that includes me, evolves through appeal decisions, interpretations handed down from the Resource Management and Appeals Tribunal and the courts. What are we creating here? Every week there's going to be a new form, a version of the form. It is also noted that Hobart City Council has developed an information. We do not need this motion. We do not need to be writing to the Local Government Association. We simply need, perhaps, to give some thought at a workshop about whether we adapt the Hobart form or not, as the case may be. And to be serious with you, I wouldn't want to be living off as an educator and being paid by the number of people who would actually access this additional information beyond what's there. So I won't be supporting the motion, and I really do think that the Local Government Association, the Planning Commission, and everyone else have gone over backwards to try to help people navigate through what is an evolving critter.
Thank you, Alderman James.
Yeah, look, I don't know whether Alderman Mulder was present at the time when we discussed this on the 10th.
He said he was in the chamber.
Okay, well, and he may be aware that I had made some pertinent comments in relation to this, because I did say that by developing a suitable material, you really have to have it in a simplified format that Joe Bloggs or Mary Lou that can actually understand what is involved. Now, I've got a meeting tomorrow morning at 10:30 with a resident, and I've got to try to explain the process of the appeal process in as many words as I can, and I'm going to have difficulty with that, even though I've been here 30 years. So look, the point about it is that how much detail are you going to have to go into? If you decide to develop a form to assist people to make representations on development applications, then who's going to do that? Is it going to be at the shop front or at the office desk here at the council chambers? is it going to be some educator or facilitator that's going to say, well, look, Mary Lou, this is how you fill out an application or representation? Do you then say to that person that the consideration of that representation will be within the statutory period? Will it be then subject to appeal? Do you go through all those processes? Now, I think that is too much, and it's too mind-boggling, in fact, to be able to explain or have some simple checklist or blueprint or in relation to what you do in relation to development applications and planning scheme amendments. I'm in two minds about this. If it can be simplified, if it can be, if the information can be related to the lowest common denominator, let's say that, then okay, that can happen. But there is an enormous amount of material that I think this is trying to encompass. And unless you have regular community meetings or sit down with a facilitator to explain the process, and that a representation should not necessarily go to the GM, it should go to the GM, but to the alderman, you know, mayor and alderman. That factor, Mr. Mayor, is missed on numerous occasions. So it depends on how far you're going to go and to what stage are you going to relate this to the people. And I think, give it a go. Okay, give it a go. But look, I'm not very confident that we can, at the end of the day, have a mechanism that will help people in the various stages, because they may not need to go to the end point. They may only need to go to the mediation stage and then say, oh, this is all too hard, and therefore they opt out. Alternatively, they then need advice if they're going to take it to appeal. Look, it's a motion that I think we need to consider, but at the same time, I've got my reservations as to whether it would achieve what we really want it to achieve.
Thanks, Alderman James. Other speakers, Alderman Newton.
Just quickly, I suppose I'd much prefer to see a proposal put forward would actually educate the community to get involved in the development of planning schemes and processes. So, because I'm sure they would actually help us to come up with a planning scheme and a process that was a lot easier to understand, because most people are too busy out there working and earn a living to deal with it. And then if it was less complicated, well then we get more things done rather than get caught up in all this sort of stuff. So all we're really doing is adding another layer of information, but it's not really helping. I mean, like I said, I'd love to see more people getting involved, but unfortunately the rules and regulations just keep marching on, and I don't think something like this is really going to help that.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Well, like Alderman Newington, I very clearly support the concept of Clarence being open for business and not being drowned in red or green tape or anything that actually is a hindrance to sensible, sustainable and strategic development of our great city. That's what we need to be looking towards achieving. I don't think this motion is as well intentioned as I'm sure it was. I don't think it meets that end. I think that our new website is a fantastic resource. I haven't had a chance to look at every bit of it, but I have had since I think Thursday or Friday I went live. Over the weekend and even earlier this morning I had a look, and I think that's fantastic. I think for residents and ratepayers, those people wanting to invest in our city, that's a fantastic resource that we ought to be putting all our efforts into ensuring that resource sort of steps up to the mark and delivers what we hope it delivers. Not putting another layer of red tape or green tape or any kind of tape. We need to cut through that tape and ensure that this great city is open for business.
I'd just like to draw Council's attention to the Building and Planning Portal project, which is currently being underway by state government, which is designed to provide an online process to take applicants step by step through the planning process. So I think this may be superfluous. I can't give you a time frame for that, it was due a year or two ago, so it'll be in the next year or two
What a good state
that will be available.
What a good state government.
Thank you. Alderman Blobby, please.
Public service.
Is that a Liberal government? Or
That's called.
I mean, it only takes one interruption and then the whole room erupts in interruptions. And so if we can please be respectful of that and avoid the intercessions, and it'll be very good. Alderman Chong.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I would just like to draw the Alderman's attention to page 21 in the quarterly report that we looked at earlier in relation to this. If you look at the chart, which is request for preliminary planning assessments, this is where people come in and talk to the staff because they don't understand the planning scheme. In the last quarter alone, 350 people came in to ask us for preliminary planning assessment because all of those 2.5 pages is so much information that people can't work their way through it. So I don't know if the form is the right way to do it, but we obviously, as a sector, need to find some way to help people understand it. I absolutely agree.
But as a
Much better if they get
Alderman Blomley, please.
if they get involved in the planning scheme
seriously.
determination, absolutely. But at the moment, they need to understand what we've got, and don't seem to be able to do that, given the number of people who come and ask us questions.
Thank you. Any other speakers on this? Right, a reply. Alderman Pearce.
Thank you, Mayor. Mayor, I'm a bit surprised at the negativity of some of the aldermen here tonight, because the fact is and it wasn't me, it was Alderman Hume that raised this, and rightly so, because you know yourself that the last council copped a bit of a beating over everything we had to do with the planning scheme, and quite often, quite often people didn't understand what was happening. Now, yes, some people have got computers, some are good at computers, they can go and read all this, but a lot of the people that used to come to us on Thursday mornings had no idea, did not have computers. And that's like Alderman James is going to find out tomorrow morning when he helps somebody, or Thursday when he helps somebody. Yeah, it's going to be good. And look, all we're trying to do is give them some information. If they want the information, we can give it there. We may direct them to certain websites and whatever. They haven't got a computer, that's irrelevant. Give them something so they can understand it. And as I said earlier, when Dr. Katrina Stevenson said to the candidates, when you go into a planning meeting, it's totally different. And I could see that when she went on and on and on, prospective candidates just gasped. They thought, you think, person wants to build a 2-storey house, you could tell them to build 1-storey. What a load of rubbish. But at least we can explain to them what we're going through as well. And if we can help anybody, and if we can just help one ratepayer, I'm sure that's a bonus. And I'm sure that once we print out things that we can give to people, I'm sure they'll disappear. I'll tell you that now, because a lot of people do want to know.
Thanks, Alderman Pearce. So the motion is as recommended. All those in favour? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Against?
Oh, sorry.
I thought it was 7-5.
Okay. Okay, I thought it was 6. The
No,
first time.
well, I read 7-5. Okay, let's move on. 11.7.4 is that council adopts a meeting schedule. Thanks, Alderman Blomley. Second, Alderman Pearce. Alderman Blomley, would you like to speak to it? Alderman Pearce. Any other speakers? Alderman Walker.
Yes, look, we're seeing it out long term. We're keeping with the proposed Monday night. This council, I think, is smart to keep it as an evening meeting. This allows more members of the community to attend, and it means that people from a wide variety of backgrounds that are still in the workforce can also put their hands forward to be an alderman with the knowledge that they'll be able to attend those meetings.
Alderman Wilder.
I wasn't going to speak, but I did note that in the discussions on the Friday workshop, there was some discussion about we might be thinking about moving the time. So just to be clear that this is the proposed schedule at this stage, but it's subject to some alterations. And there's some good reasons for some changes too. We've seen it here again tonight. We've seen it with the planning scheme. We've seen it with representations. People who found out on Friday at 3 o'clock in the afternoon that they were going to get slugged 85 grand, and that left them 1.5 business days to try to get hold of the alderman, to try to get some support going for something, to try to get some alternative motion going through. 1.5 days is insufficient to do that. If we were to move it on to a Tuesday or a Wednesday, it would give us that little bit more time to get our heads around some of these complex issues, to perhaps sound out, to perhaps go and talk to a few representatives, perhaps go and talk to a few other people who want to come and talk to us. And I think that although I'm happy to adopt the Monday schedule, I think it needs to be clear that Council has got some, can have a pretty good discussion about why we might just need a little bit more time between the briefing sessions and the meetings.
Mr Mayor, I would like to take up on that point. I think we are pretty constrained by the amount of time. And through you, Mr Mayor, I'd actually like the General Manager to comment on that, because I think if we are actually adopting a meeting schedule this is not just for the next few weeks or months, this is for a whole year. In fact, two. Yeah. So I think we need some clarification, because I think Alderman Mulder is making it sound incredibly simple when it is not.
Look, I think before asking the General Manager to respond, it's important to note that we've often changed meeting schedules to meet separate occasions or public holidays or something like that comes up.
That's a little bit different, Mr Mayor, as compared to two years. And
indeed, we have the capacity to workshop at any time, and go through all the pros and cons. And I understood from the briefing session that was something that we might do in the future. But having said all that, General Manager, would you wish to comment without entering the debate?
Yeah, thank you. That's going to be really easy. I would just, I suppose, reaffirm your comments, Mr Mayor, and that is that, yes, whilst this is adopting a schedule, there is nothing preventing Council from altering that schedule at any given point in time. The other comment I'd make is that, irrespective of the day that Council meets, we have an obligation to issue the Council agenda a minimum of a certain number of days in respect of that. If you make that gap too large, you quite frequently will come up against problems where you have statutory time limits and planning applications coming off application, and then if you've brought forward the day to get the agenda, the days required to get the agenda out, you're minimising the time between planning applications coming off, advertising, and the agenda being required to be issued. So I would just throw that into the mix, but you are quite at liberty to change dates if you wish.
So I think it's certainly worthy of a workshop, and if Aldermen wish to discuss altering the time, then there are a lot of factors to take into account. Does that answer your question?
Not really, but we'll pursue it in a workshop.
I'm sure you would have noted that. Are there any other speakers? Okay, Alderman Blomley, right of reply. Just put the motion in as per agenda. All those in favour? Against? Carried.
Who was against it?
Well, actually, I saw one hand amongst the 12 not go up on either side of the fence. Oh, I'm sorry. In that case, I'll recommit. All those in favour? Carried unanimously. Sorry, Alderman Newington, I didn't see your hand go up. Item 11.7.5, copying refuse disposal site, proposed TAS Networks easement. Alderman Walker.
Yes.
Thank you. Do we have a second? Alderman Blomley. Thank you. Alderman Walker.
Look, this is a fabulous thing and it's completely consistent with my eco credentials. The economics of this are fantastic. We are going to be taking a waste emission and monetising it. So let's get on with it.
Just very briefly, Mr Mayor, this is climate change policy in action, and I strongly support the position taken by the Copping Refuse Disposal Site Authority.
Other speakers? I guess there's no need for a right reply. Alderman Walker, we'll put the motion. All those in favour? Carried unanimously. Item 12, Alderman's question time.
Excuse me.
There are no matters on notice, so...
Yeah, we missed one.
My apologies. 11.7.6, partnership grants. Do we have a move and a second, please?
So I'm more than happy to move the officer's recommendation as listed.
Alderman James.
And
Seconded Alderman Kennedy.
Seek council support.
Thank you. Alderman Kennedy, would you like to speak to the motion? Other speakers?
Yes, Mr Mayor, I'd like to speak to it. I actually think that the two organisations that we are granting this money to are very worthy of it. I've been involved with both groups in one way, shape or form, and I actually think that the work that they do is incredibly worthy and actually does focus very much on that strategic aspect that is required in terms of partnership grants. Thank you.
Right reply, Alderman James? I shall put the motion, which is the officer's recommendation. All those in favour? Carried unanimously, thank you. And Alderman's question time now. The usual practice here is under meeting regs, each Alderman has the opportunity to ask 2 questions. And I'll take the opportunity to go around. I try to change it from side to side at different meetings. But on this occasion, I'll ask Alderman Mulder if you'd like to open the batting, please.
Mr Mayor, can I say no?
Alderman Kennedy, do you have any questions? Alderman Ewing? Alderman Walker?
Yes, I do. There's been some talks and some commentary around the new website that's come online. But I think I just received a dead cat bounce from a council app. When I go onto the My Local Council app, which has been well utilised by residents for several years now, the message comes up, as of Friday 8 November 2018, Clarence City Council will no longer operate the My Local app. This will be replaced by a new responsive council. Well, I think that's a bit presumptuous of the app. But here's my question, because this was a key thing for thousands of residents to get that reminder on their phone that it's these bins tonight, that if they walk past some graffiti, they can take the thing and and let us be aware of it and get notifications of events, etc. So I don't have a perfect memory, so I'm interested to know at what point in time it was discussed with the Alderman that we would be disconnecting with this app, because I seem to have overlooked it or in the weekly briefings or
Through Mr Mayor, I don't know that discussion did occur other than we're instituting a new website, but our new website has been designed specifically to be mobile phone friendly in terms of its sizing and formatting and the like. I will confess that it does not give the reminder in relation to the bins, but all of the information obtainable through the My Local Services app, with that exception, is available on the website in a more access-friendly format, I would argue.
I suggest that you're arguing that it's more access-friendly than the previous website. I still don't understand how... we still haven't explained the rationale about why we had to euthanise My Local.
Sorry, My Local... Again, I'll take this on notice and provide a more detailed response on technical advice, but I understand the My Local Services app was actually linked to the Unity software we used for the previous website and is not compatible with the new website.
Thank you. Alderman Pearce.
Thank you. My question is defibrillators, Mayor. How can we make it easier for a lot of sporting clubs and well-used sporting clubs I'm talking about, how we can make it easier for them to obtain defibrillators? I know we have grants they can apply for. I wonder if I can just have notice of those. And look, do we have a register of what sporting grounds of ours do have defibrillators? I mean, if we haven't got a register, is there any chance we could get a register of that? Because a lot of defibrillators are donated by Rotary and other clubs like that.
Mr. Graham?
All
All right. Well,
John's got an answer.
John, Mr. Toohey.
Through you, Mr. Mayor. State government recently closed its applications for defibrillators from across the state. That was an initiative to try and bring and provide that facility and help for sporting clubs. And if you receive a defibrillator, you automatically get registered, and there's a central site for those clubs. And most clubs will also just indicating that they've got a defibrillator on site. Now, until we, Mr. Clarence, you said that, can we get this Clarence where all the defibrillators are? Yes, thank you.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Mr Mayor, through you to the General Manager, in Saturday's Mercury newspaper there was an advertisement seeking a climate change officer for Clarence City Council. And I've gone on the website to look at the PD. My first question is this a new position or a replacement position?
Through you, Mr Mayor, it's a replacement position for an officer that's recently resigned.
Thank you. One further question, Mr Mayor. In the actual advertisement, it says that we're seeking suitably qualified and experienced persons to coordinate Council's response to climate change. Does Council have a policy with regards to climate change?
We certainly have elements of a policy in relation to climate change, and particularly around coastal matters, particularly around providing for improved energy performance around council facilities. We certainly have been participating through the STCA in terms of some of their climate change initiatives. So as per one distinct policy, no, but there are elements of a range of initiatives that we participate in that this officer would become involved in.
It includes bushfires.
Yep.
Alderman Evans. Alderman Bomberto.
Yes, thank you, Mr Mayor. I'd like to know, Mr Mayor, are the officers aware of the sale of a strategic piece of open space hilltop, a property that's known as 78 Gilston Bay Road?
Through you, Mr Mayor, yes, we are actually aware of that property coming on the market. For those who don't know, it's strategically located, I suppose you'd say, in the vicinity of...
It's on Fisher's Hill.
Yeah, Fisher's Hill, I was going to say
Near
down
Bedlam
towards...
Walls.
Yeah, Shag Bay Way, but down that way. Certainly we are aware of it. It's certainly listed for discussion amongst a couple of us over the next few days in terms of whether or not we need to bring a report to council over any necessity to at least look at acquiring the piece of land. It is strategically located, certainly in relation to a number of our tracks and trails and open space areas.
Supplementary, are the officers aware that the expression of interest actually closes very soon? Closes on...
Some of them may be, I'm not, but I'll certainly take advice on that.
All right, thank you.
Thank you. Alderman James.
Yes, thank you, Mr Mayor. I have two questions. The first one is in relation to the Kangaroo Bay Hotel and Training Facility. Mr Mayor, and perhaps if you're unable to answer the question, you could, if you don't mind, refer it to the GM. Yes, I thought because the next question I want to put directly to you, if that's okay. But my question is in relation to building approvals. Mr Paul, have building approvals been granted to Hunter to proceed with the building of the hotel? If so, when will work commence? If not, when do you anticipate building approvals to be approved?
I can probably answer those questions in reverse order. I won't answer them in reverse order. To my knowledge, no further building permit other than 1A has been issued at this stage, and that was for the early earthworks package and some ground stabilisation in relation to future works. To my knowledge, no further building application has been lodged at this time, although I am aware that there's been work undertaken in terms of preliminary lodgement of that, and I think they're awaiting a couple of the required reports under the planning scheme, under the planning permit rather, to be finalised before work can proceed further. In terms of what their timeframe is, frankly, I have no idea.
Thank you. My question is to the Mayor, Clarence. Alderman Chipman, in your address and certification on Wednesday night in relation to the signing off for the next 4 years, you mentioned, amongst other things, community consultation. Are you aware that Council did consider a concept plan for the Kangaroo Bay Boulevard development from Hunter some time back? Are you prepared to either seek advice from the GM as to conduct a workshop prior to, or any changes that may have occurred in relation to the boulevard development? And if so, would the council be in a position to have some public consultation, what comes out of the workshop, before an official development application is lodged with the council?
Look, I will ask the GM to give us some more information on that, but as you're aware, the previous council took a very close interest in this matter, and we actually discussed, I think at some stage, certainly in a workshop, how we might go about consulting with the public in regard to the boulevard site. General Manager.
Through you, Mr Mayor, I can't remember the exact dates, but Council has previously resolved to grant, I'll call it preferred developer status to 200 developments in respect of the boulevard site. That necessitated the entering into an agreement to reflect that preferred development status. That agreement has been entered into, and it requires them to come back to us with a proposal, I think within, I think it's 12 months, was it? Probably by May of next year, I think it is. It was also in Council's resolution of going down that path. Council mandated that an agreed public consultation program had to be undertaken in relation to the preparation of any future proposal.
It's supplementary in relation to the public consultation process that the GM has just referred to. Is that going to take the format of what we had over there at the Link building, in as much as it was really a show and tell, and they didn't really get into the nitty gritty of what was being proposed for the Rosny Hill development? So I'm just wondering to what extent is the public consultation going to be a show and tell, or is it going to be a bona fide consultation where the community is engaged and has a look at the concept plan prior to the development application being lodged?
I believe we've set some parameters for that consultation.
GM, please.
Through you, Mr Mayor, I think we need to be careful we don't confuse information with consultation. The proposal that we entered into, the agreement that we entered into with them required them to undertake a public consultation process, and I think if I remember correctly, it was to be put to me and approved by Council, delegated to me to approve an appropriate public consultation program.
Alderman Warren.
Mindful of the time, two quick ones from questions from people who've contacted me. First of all, I'd like to pay tribute to former Alderman McFarlane and the great work she did in getting the flagpole for the Aboriginal flag. But
can I point out, and I understand the point and the sentiment, but this is an opportunity for questions,
yes,
not
my
statements.
question is, when is the flag flown? Because it was noted to me that the other flags were up, but the Aboriginal flag wasn't. So is it only flown on special occasions?
Through you, Mr Mayor, I think the Council policy is that the Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander flag and or both are only flown during specific special weeks or periods of recognition, as distinct from at all times.
The other question is the Rosny Hill development listed under the strategic projects on the new website, and if not, could it be, so that it's easy for people to find?
Potentially it could be. I'm just not sure what we'd actually list there at the moment, but we'll have a look at that one, Mr Mayor. But I don't know what we list.
Well, that brings us to the conclusion of the open session of Council. I'd like Alderman Pearce. Well, thank you. I'd just like to thank the members of the public and for enduring the council meeting. It's been a long one tonight, over 3 hours, and very much appreciate your attendance. We do need to go into closed session. We don't have the opportunity of a cabinet meeting like the state and federal colleagues.
Where are you going, Tony? Do we move it? Is that a question? Or?
Yes. Alderman Pearce.
Are we moving it?
Thank you. Do we have a seconder, please? Thanks, Alderman Walker.